Well, should we
noisy.
should we get started? It's just after 9:30. Good morning, everyone. I'll start with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Ottawa is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence ont enrichi et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. I'll ask our committee coordinator, Kelly Crozier, to do a roll call, please.
Councillor Brockington.
I'm here.
Councillor Cluche.
Présent.
Councillor Curry. Councillor Dudas. Here. Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Leeper.
Here.
Councillor Menard. Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Chair Moffat.
Here.
Chair Gower.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thanks, Kelly. And Councillor Curry has advised that she is at a Hydro Ottawa board meeting this morning, so she may join us in progress if she can. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 2 to 10 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on April 27th, 2022, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Are there any declarations of interest today? I see none. Okay, so what we're going to do is go through the agenda and we'll hold any items where there are questions or delegations. So the first item is Planning, Real Estate and Economic Development Department 2021 Year-End Report. There is a staff presentation and I know a few councillors have questions, so we'll hold this item. Item number 2 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 3713 Borrisokane Road in Rideau Goulburn. Councillor Moffat has a technical amendment. There are no delegations registered for this item. Are there any committee members want to hold this one? So Councillor Moffat, why don't you introduce your technical amendment to start with?
Thank you. Whereas staff identified further reviewed, sorry, that makes no sense. Staff identified and further reviewed the asset management implications of report ACS 2022 PIE-PS 0033, and whereas asset management implications pertaining to the subject site have been identified, therefore be it resolved that this report be revised by deleting the asset management implication section in its entirety and replacing with the following. It has been confirmed that there is sufficient capacity in the existing water, wastewater, stormwater infrastructure systems to accommodate the proposed development. Assets acquired through development of these lands will add to the city's inventory for operations and maintenance, as well as life cycle renewal and replacement in the long term. In order to maintain stormwater recharge in the Cars Esker, a local geological feature that contributes to base flow in the Jock River, this subdivision will use a unique stormwater management system within the road right-of-way, commonly referred to as the Etobicoke exfiltration system. This system will require a high level of operations and maintenance effort relative to conventional storm sewer systems to ensure its effectiveness and longevity. Therefore, be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act.
Now, I see Eric Pillow from the clerk's office with a hand up. Eric, did you have a comment or something to raise?
Apologies, Chair. I didn't realize my hand was up.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So there's a representative from the applicant, Lisa De La Rosa from FO10 is here. Lisa, we have no delegations and there's no questions from committee members. If we're prepared to carry this item, do you wish to speak today?
No, that's fine. I do not need to speak.
Okay, thank you, Lisa, for joining us. So for the report recommendations on the zoning bylaw amendment for 3713 Borrisokane Road, are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried, thank you.
Carried.
Item number 3 we will hold because there is a delegation registered. Item number 4 is official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 335 and 339 Roosevelt Avenue, 344 Wilson Avenue, and 379 and 389 Wilmont Avenue. There's a motion for deferral from Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. There are some administrative issues that require this to be deferred. I note the 344 Wilson Avenue is actually 344 Winston Avenue. So there's, so rather than read everything, I'm just going to say, therefore be resolved, the Planning Committee defer the item until the April 28th, 2022 Planning Committee and authorize a revised report to be submitted to committee with notice being provided.
Thanks, Jeff. Yes, the corner of Winston and Wilmot. Is the deferral motion carried then?
Carried. Carried.
Carried. So we'll consider that at the next meeting. Number 5 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 841, 845, and 855 Grennan Avenue in Bay Ward. There are no delegations registered. I see Councillor Kavanaugh's here. Do we need to hold this one, Councillor, or any quick questions or comments you wanted to add?
I'll just put in comments. Since there's no delegations, I spoke to residents and they did express their concern on the loss of parking. This is a street that does not have very much parking, and they have big concerns about the fact that the parking is being reduced because there is very little in the neighborhood, and the bus service is not beside a transit station, so it will require connecting to a transit station, so therefore it's not transit-oriented development. Therefore, it should have had more parking in relation to this site. However, I do understand that we're trying to encourage people to use transit, and I hope that we'll have improved transit in that area, because at the moment it's a concern. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. So we do have representatives from the applicant here, James Ireland and Murray Chown. If the committee is prepared to carry this, do you wish to speak on the item?
No, Co-Chair Gower, we don't need to.
Okay, thank you. So for the zoning bylaw amendment 841, 845, and 855A Grennan Avenue, are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried, thank you. Item number 6, zoning bylaw amendment for 1300 McWaters Road in College Ward. Again, we have no delegations registered. I don't see the ward councillor on the call. We do have representatives from the applicant here, Gadi Zaki, Paul Black from Foten, and Rod Leahy from Leahy Architects. If our committee is prepared to carry this one, do you wish to have this held to speak?
We do not, Co-Chair Gower.
Okay, thank you. So on the zoning bylaw amendment for 1300 McWaters Road, are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried, thank you. Item number 7 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 4775 and 4875 Spratt Road in Gloucester, South Ian. There is a technical amendment from Councillor Moffat. There are no delegations registered for this one. Chair Moffat, can you introduce that amendment, please?
Thank you. Whereas document 1 of the report ACS 2022 PIEPS 0032 amends the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw. And whereas the proposed staff recommendation were intended to reflect the proposed zoning as contained in document 1, therefore be it resolved that with respect to report ACS 2022 PIEPS 0032, Planning Committee recommends Council approve the following revised recommendation. 1, that Planning Committee recommend Council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 4775, 4875 Spratt Road to rezone the lands from development reserve to residential fourth density subzone Z, residential fourth density subzone Z with an exception, and maximum permitted height of 14 meters, open space, minor institutional, and mixed use to permit a new residential subdivision as detailed in document 2. Therefore, be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act.
Okay, so we do have representatives from the applicant, Nadia DeSanti from WSP and Marcel Denome from Riverside South Development Corp. If the committee's prepared to carry this item, do you wish to speak on it?
Good morning, co-chair. No, we do not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's deal with the technical amendment for Chair Moffat's technical amendment. Is that carried?
Carried.
Carried. And then the zoning bylaw amendment 4775 and 4875 Spratt Road as amended. Is the report recommendations carried as amended?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 8 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 1298 Ogilvy Road in Beacon Hill, Searville. We have no delegations registered for this, no amendments that I'm aware of. Anyone wishing to hold this item? I don't think so. We have 2 representatives from the applicant here. We have Scott Alain from Foten and Kevin Yem from Richcraft. If our committee is prepared to carry this one, do either of you wish to speak? Actually, I don't see them on the screen yet, so just give a moment here.
Hi, thanks for the patience as I join Co-Chair Gower. There's no need for us to speak if there's no request from the committee.
Okay, thank you. So are the report recommendations for the zoning bylaw amendment at 1298 Ogilvy Road carried?
Carried. Carried.
Carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair.
Item number 9 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 745 Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway and 234 Atlantis Avenue for the reconstruction of Westboro Beach. We have no delegations on this item. There are 2 representatives from the applicant. Did you have any comments, Councillor Leeper, or are we good?
No, I just, I mean, obviously the entire community is extremely excited by this. It offers the opportunity for the whole city to get to know Westboro Beach as the facility is upgraded to include better amenity, restaurant and facilities like that. So I am looking forward to welcoming everyone in Ottawa to Westboro Beach when this reopens. And to the residents of Westboro Beach, thank you for your patience this summer while the beach is closed.
Thanks, Councillor Leeper. So from the NCC, we have Patricia McCann-McMillan and Andrew Sacret from the National Capital Commission. If the committee is ready to carry this item, do either of you wish to speak on it today?
No, we have no wish to speak. Thank you very much, Co-Chair.
Okay, thank you. So the zoning bylaw amendment for 745 Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway and 234 Atlantis Avenue, are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. Item number 10 is a City of Ottawa zoning bylaw 2008-250 Omnibus Amendments Q2 2022. Any questions or requests to hold for this one? All right, then. Are these report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay. Item number 11 is a status update, planning committee inquiries and motions for the period ending April 1st, 2022. Are those report recommendations carried or any requests to hold that one?
Carried as well.
Carried. Okay. I think we could deal with number 12 as well, but it's a motion that I introduced. So I'll hand the chair to Councillor Moffat. This is the motion changes to the Development Charges Act, which was initiated by staff.
All right, thanks. Councillor Gower, did you want to introduce your motion?
The report recommendations, it's around the development charge deferral rate, so that the 2022 development charge deferral rate be an average of the 2020 and 2021 inclusive, representing a rate of 5.83% plus the standard 0.5% administrative adjustment for a total rate of 6.33%, and that this rate be effective beginning on May 1st, 2022 through to March 31st, 2023 inclusive, and that these rates be applied for the duration of the deferral installments over 5 or 20 years, and any locked-in development charge rates over this time frame. And staff are available for questions if we want to hold or answer quick questions now, I guess, Scott.
Did you want to hold the item, Councilor Menard, or do you want to just? Oh, yeah, there's two. We'll just hold it.
It was okay.
Well, there's 2 hands up, so we're just gonna hold it. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Co-Chair Moffat. Okay, let's go. That's all the items. So we'll go back to the beginning. We've held 3 items then. The first one we held was the Planning, Real Estate, and Economic Development Department 2021 year-end report. We do have a staff presentation. I believe it's Charmaine Forgy who's doing the presentation, and Steve Willis is here as well.
Actually, Chair, I'll be doing the presentation quickly and happy to answer some questions related to this. Charmaine will be assisting me with any comments on this, and certainly her team helped prepare the statistics that are the backbone of this presentation. So if we can have the presentation up, please. Thanks, Kelly. So pleased to be here at committee today to give you the presentation for the annual report of the Planning, Real Estate, and Economic Development Department. And just recall that in 2021, which was before the latest reconfiguration of departments, the department had planning, real estate services, economic development, long-range planning, right-of-way heritage and urban design, building code services, transportation planning, which came in later in the year, business and technical support services, and infrastructure services. So there are a few references to infrastructure services in this presentation, but as council is aware, that's no longer part of our department in 2022. Next slide, please. I think the most important thing I could say to committee and to express very publicly my thanks to the team of Planning, Real Estate, and Economic Development is that our department managed to maintain business continuity through the pandemic, which was no mean feat. It was a very, very significant operational shift for us in a number of ways. We continued to improve on what we learned in 2020, and it was almost a record year for all application types. So layering those two things together, it was an absolutely unbelievable year. We kept all of our service centers running with safety measures in place, including plexiglass barriers and scheduled appointments in many instances. Staff did leave the department to support functions of Ottawa Public Health, where we were able to help out on that. And our infrastructure services team was able to react very quickly for a need for an additional COVID testing site at Rail Frio Arena, which was put down all work and make that a top priority right away. So I want to express my personal thanks to each and every employee of the department in building code services, planning services, right-of-way heritage and urban design, economic development and long-range planning, transportation planning, business and technical support services, and infrastructure services for the dedication and commitment to providing services to the city, continuing our business as city building during the pandemic. Next slide, please. As I indicated, it was a near record year in many areas, and it was a record year in certain types of applications. Building inspections, we did over almost 77,000 inspections over the course of the year, which showed the intense level of construction activity in Ottawa. We hit our record 10,000 permit level much earlier in the year than we normally hit. And that also includes a number of very technical inspections, including almost 20,000 mechanical inspections and 24,500 plumbing inspections. Next slide, please. So our business and technical support services, which is a bit of the, isn't in front of committee, they're the backbone support to the entire department. They helped us produce 251 committee reports to various committees and council over the year, which I think is probably adds to it's the most of any department in the organization. We ran 644 stakeholder engagement activities. And if you think about that, that is effectively 2+ every business day of the year running stakeholder engagement activities. And we handled 922 formal inquiries as a result of requests for information from the community. Thank you. Next slide, please. Economic development and long-range planning, in addition to completing the new official plan, which is a very significant achievement for the department and for the city. And we're very pleased that had near unanimous support of council at the end of a very extensive and intense process. We also did 175 bylaws drafted to provide the backbone support of zoning approvals in the city. We also managed grants and several grant programs. So we have 2 grant programs, and we had a number of retail applications as well, 58 of those through the community improvement planning process. Planning services, which handles all the development approvals, had almost 1,400 applications come in the door. 1,191 of them were approved through delegated authority, and there's more information in the report on those delegated authority used. And 184 items came through committee and council for approval because they're outside of delegated authority. Next slide, please. Right-of-way heritage and urban design. It was a very, very busy year for construction activity in the city. So there were almost 15,000 right-of-way permits issued and 126 heritage permits issued as well, which is, it's a healthy indication that our heritage stock's being taken care of in the city and being added to and adapted appropriately. And they also managed the development review process, handling just over $193 million in letters of credit, where the securities we take through the process to ensure that the conditions that we impose are actually executed on and the infrastructure is turned over in adequate shape to the city at the end of the process. And so that's always an interesting indicator of the level of development activity every year, and that's why we track it. Next slide, please. So we have a number of initiatives for further improvement. You will see information in the report on our timelines. There are some of those numbers are in good shape, and some of them are still need improvement. Some of that has to do with the challenges of continuing to operate in an adapted mode away from normal operations during a pandemic. Some of it has to do with the high volume of applications we received. Some of it has to do with the complexity of the applications we were dealing with. So the department has a program of continuous improvement. We tackle different areas every year to try to improve the processes. So we are looking at our fees and staffing again, and I think the Bill 109 in particular is going to mean it's absolutely necessary that I'll be back in front of this committee with a look at both of those issues. And for committee's information, I was informed by Mr. Mark this morning that Bill 109 is likely to have third reading today in the legislature in Ontario. So we expect it to imminently be law in Ontario. We're also doing a business process review regarding applications. One of the complex engineering questions we have is when applicants have no legal outlet for stormwater drainage and how we handle that. So we're reviewing our processes in tandem with infrastructure and water services on that. We are doing various pilot projects to see if we can shorten the review timelines in anticipation of Bill 109. We feel that online meetings have been incredibly successful. Certainly the participation rates have been much higher. We've had a high degree of satisfaction that people feel that it's more convenient and easy to participate in consultation because they can do it from their home. If they have childcare issues or if they're busy trying to make time to go for work, it's actually quite simple to get online in a meeting wherever they're at and participate in it. And so we've got high levels of satisfaction on you. We have been working on new techniques for people to make payment to us to move away from traditional checks at counters. So we're working on digital uploads for planning submissions and rolling out various forms of e-payment. Some significant changes in building code services in the last year on that, which will make it easier for anybody applying for a permit. And we've been exploring the tool the province has had in place for a number of years and wanting us to look at, which is a community planning permit pilot to see how it would best be used in the city in areas where what's the right type of application. So we're looking at various versions of that, and we'll be back to committee in the next term of council with some suggestions on where it's best used. Next slide, please. So I'm just at this point happy to take any questions from committee members. And again, the full delegated authority report for people who are interested will be available later today. And the department publishes just some user-friendly annual statistics for people if they're interested. Thanks, you chairs.
Thank you, Steve. Co-Chair Moffat has a question.
Yeah, thanks. I just touch on this. I know it's a year-end report and it's focused on last year, but it's hard not to look ahead to what that means and what's to come with everything going on and all the discussion about housing and planning and file timelines at the province and the federal level, who seem to want to give us money, but not actually for anything that's operational, but some undetermined money for undetermined things. But I look at 2021, you have a record total of applications. We've been constantly hitting records on building code services. And there's a lot of talk about processing and how do we get through this. Now, I personally don't necessarily believe that money has been our issue. We have a surplus in planning. We have a surplus in building code services. We did have conversation at this committee about building code services and about the ability to hire and retain building inspectors. I know a lot of our planning staff can also be contract employees, which aren't always the easiest to retain in those positions. So just curious, what we can do here, what we can talk about here to sort of try to prepare for the future. I don't expect with Bill 109, its implementation being January 1st, I'm not sure I expect a lot of site plan control applications over the next several months, because I imagine they'll wait until Bill 109 is in effect. But if we're planning for a future, if we're planning for reduced timelines, what can we do in terms of the staff position? If it's hiring more people, what type of direction can we provide that can get you back to us with a plan to put that in place so that we are able to hit these new timelines?
So, Chair, if I may go back to just one discrete issue on building code services, because I do feel it's appropriate to give you an update on building code services, and then I'll come back to the broader planning approval side. So on building code services, I remember at council, I think it was 2 years ago, Councillor El Shantiri directly asked me at the time if I was asking for enough in terms of new staffing positions in building code services. And my response at the time was, well, we still had a lot of vacancies. It didn't seem appropriate to ask for more until we at least filled those and saw where we're at. I am very proud of the fact that the chief building official, John Buck, has been very successful in hiring lately, and we filled a number of positions that we had struggled to fill for years. It's still difficult to recruit, and we are looking at our competitiveness as an employer in that area, and I'm working closely with HR on that issue and the chief building official. We will be coming back and asking for some additional resources, because in reflection on now that we have those positions in place, we will be coming back. And as committee is aware, building code is funded, it's entirely self-funded from the building code application fees. It goes into a dedicated reserve. It's managed entirely. It's self-contained. There's no impact on the taxpayer. And we believe that we can provide better service to applicants if we do beef up that service. So I will be coming with a report to committee with the chief building official for some additional resources in that area. As I said, I didn't want to do it until we filled the ones we already had approved. Now we're asking for some more. On the planning timelines, I must say we're still trying to assess the implications, and I do feel that we're going to need to come to committee and talk about this more fully. Looking quickly at our 2021 report and our timelines, approximately 70% of our zoning applications, under the new provincial bill 109, we would have had to refund the fees. Over 80% of our site plan applications, we would have to refund fees. So this new formula for the province, it puts us in a difficult position, because in one hand, we always have to project how many applications we think we're going to get and set the revenue part of the budget based on projections, and then the actuals come in later, and then we set staffing levels to match the budget to keep it self-contained and not a draw on the taxpayers. But it's very difficult to project. And now if we have money in and then money back out, at this stage of the game, we're going to have to bring forward a strategy for how is council going to handle this? How are we going to handle this? Is this higher rates? Is this tax dollars to backstop the department? Is there a reserve that should be set up to buffer us in these situations? These are all things we're going to need to explore. So I am in the process of recruiting an interim manager in the department to look at Bill 109 implementation, to develop the department's decision, because we have to do this while we're still delivering the services, and I can't expect my management team to just put down what they're working on and then focus on this. We need to actually bring someone in and dedicate them to this, and we're going to need to bring forward a strategy. But I also think, because of the historic problems that are evident in the report for you today, there are some quick wins that we would like to bring forward to council before the summer or or in the early months of the summer for some immediate remedies in areas that we know are pinch points right now and can get on with doing it, because it does take time to adapt, get people in positions and actually do work. And contract positions have been very difficult because the staff turnover is very high on those positions. We're in a very hot labor market. Someone taking a contract position will not stay in that job when there's a permanent job opportunity available to them weeks, months afterwards. So it's been very difficult for the department to create stability with those positions. So we'd like to convert some of those contract positions to permanent positions to reduce the churn from that. So Chair, there's so much more that I could say, and I do believe it's our responsibility to bring reports back to you, but those are the immediate measures that we're trying to take to adapt to the new legislation.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, I obviously, respecting that your department is busy with everything else and not wanting to, put you on the spot as to when you can come back to us. But I think this committee would enjoy a conversation about that, about how we can address the contract positions and look at more permanent positions to make sure that we're filling those roles and maintaining the staff in place. There's no question that we have great staff at our planning group. I think we all work with them. We also know that there's been a number of departures, retirements and whatnot, which creates more gaps. And it's tough if you're constantly filling those with contract roles and lower spots. So, I think with the will of committee, I wouldn't mind, providing that direction to you to come back to us with a staffing plan as to how we can address the needs of the planning department with respect to Bill 109 and other things. We're not the only municipality that's talking about staffing and the impact on taxpayers when it comes to some of the regulation we're seeing in Bill 109 and some of the punitive measures that we're seeing from the taxpayer perspective in terms of covering costs of applications that don't meet the timelines. It's tough because, we all understand that it's not always the city that makes an application not meet a timeline. There's a lot of back and forth, and sometimes we don't get the back to our fourth when we're having those negotiations, and those put us off. And then, if I'm not mistaken, if we provide comments back on, let's say, day 59, and we had 60 days, they could take 6, 7, 8 months to get back to us, but our 60-day clock still ticks. So once they come back to us, we have 1 day. So that's quite significant in terms of being able to, drop everything that you're doing, which might be, maybe you're working on day 57 or day 58 of another file. Now you got day 59 rolls back in, and you've got to drop everything on that one to get back to this one. It's near impossible to actually satisfy both of those files, and then you're paying back the fees on both, which isn't necessarily an issue that we created, but it's an issue that Bill 109 creates. So however we can best manage that, I think is important. So having you come back to us with a plan to focus on staffing, I think would be important for us to, as soon as possible, but certainly respecting that your department is working on many other things at this time.
So Chair, again, the game plan is, I think we're going to bring a quick win plan back to you in the short term. My hope is June or July on that. I'm just trying to compile the business case that's appropriate for committee and council to consider. Those are the areas where we know today we have pinch points and can have some remedies that would have some meaningful impact on what we're already doing. Those were things we were working on pre-Bill 109. And then, as I said, when I have the team do a full assessment on our business practices and operations as a result of Bill 109, we'll need support from legal because there will be bylaws that need to be changed as a result of Bill 109, such as the site plan control bylaw and the delegation of authority bylaw. Those will bring that forward in a more fulsome, holistic report at a later date. And as I said, we're still trying to assess the implications, and we're waiting for the final version of the legislation to understand that.
All right, thanks for that. And then just lastly too, I know one of the things that we often hear about, I think at least I hear about probably more from applicants than anything else, is the registration process. So after it leaves your department and then it requires that legal sign off. Is that something we would look at too, as to how we could advance those? Or I'm not sure if those fit in with the timeline issues.
So Chair, Mr. Mark and I are talking that as part of the quick win report, we're going to be bringing in some suggestions on beefing up resources in that area. So, those can be paid for through applicant fees, and I think it's our intention to support Mr. Mark's team on that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Willis. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chair Moffat. Councillor Brockington.
Morning. One of the challenges with Bill 109 is it's more about optics than building affordable housing. Going into an election, the government wants to appear to be doing something with this bill. And in fact, when Mr. Willis says 70% of our zoning applications and 80% of our site plan applications won't make these timelines, it's very concerning, particularly what the ramifications will be to offset this revenue loss should that remain and this legislation pass. Mr. Willis, this unit within your shop is on a cost recovery basis. Is that correct?
Sure, that's what the intent is. When I started with the city 5 years ago, we weren't at a good cost recovery level, and we've been working progressively to get closer and closer to that line. There are still some work to do in terms of overhead charges to make it equivalent to building code. Building code is fully cost recovery and fully self-contained. We do need to do some further adjustments on that, but we've also been trying to manage various changes in an orderly way. So we're much closer than we were 5 years ago.
But I think it's fair to say the revenues that these applications bring in help offset staffing costs. And if that is no longer the case because they have to be refunded, then I think you mentioned this, the city has to come up with a strategy as to how we're going to address that. But I hope the legislation is further refined. Bill 109 or not, the city's ability to close applications is longer than, I guess, the average that we're aiming towards. So can you give us a sense a year from now when we're talking about the 2022 annual report, will you have made gains in shortening the processing time for applications? And many people think when I or others advocate for processing the applications quicker, we're just doing this in the interest of developers. Nothing could be further from the truth. We're trying to get housing built in the city, and the longer we wait, the more expensive it becomes. Developers don't pay for that. New homeowners pay for those added costs. So you said you'd be coming back in a couple months. Will that include a strategy to help reduce the timelines associated with file approvals, knowing and acknowledging many of the reasons for processing delays aren't due to city staff or issues within your shop? There are a lot of factors that contribute to that. But is your overall goal shortening the timelines that this process entails? Thank you.
So, Chair, it's certainly been the department's goal to streamline timelines in as many areas as possible. It's always been the case. We've done a very good diagnosis of various things that slow down the process. And some of it has to do with, we're going to have no choice but be stricter with applicants on applications that are incomplete or poor quality coming in. They may be refused, we can refuse to accept them if they're incomplete, but if they're poor quality, we may be before committee with a rapid refusal now in the new system, which says this application may have merits, but it's in such poor shape, we can't actually give you a recommendation. We recommend you refuse it, because that's maybe what we have to do. We do know we have choke points in around some of the engineering details, and some of that has to do with updating engineering standards, and some of it has to do with having a process internally for review for that. That's more acute in certain parts of the city than others, particularly where there are complex drainage issues, such as in the rural area or in areas where we don't have legal outlet. As I said, that's a complicated issue. We can shorten processes on timelines for people to provide comments. It's a trade-off. People have less time to comment, and we'll see some reaction to that, but that is part of it. And frankly, I think, we're losing a lot of years of experience out the door with people who are retiring. And so we need to provide enough support to a younger, less experienced, but highly professional and motivated team. And I frankly think one of the things I need to solve is I don't have enough line level managers in the system for a younger team. I use the analogy a little bit that we're like the 67s, where you can have a great high performing team and then a bunch of them graduate to the NHL and we got to start again and coach a new team of really great prospects. So I will be bringing recommendations for beefing up even at that layer as well. We also, in our existing technology, which we're in the process of replacing, don't have a good metric of starting and stopping the clock with an application. So the land management solution, which is rolled out in building code services now, we need to roll it out in the other areas. And we're looking about whether it's feasible to speed that up, but that will come at a cost. So we're assessing that issue as well. And that's why I have to bring you a comprehensive strategy report. I'm reacting off the cuff right now with instinct and basically what we've researched so far, but we're very focused on what these implications are right now.
Thank you. And I'll just close by, can you remind the committee, I have a lot on my mind lately, remind the committee of the city's reaction to Bill 109. But prior to the bill coming out, we submitted a very detailed and comprehensive analysis and our feedback on that. Now that the legislation's come out, it's a very tight timeline. Maybe you could speak to that real quick. They want this legislation approved before the election. How is the city of Ottawa going to provide our reactionary comments now that the legislation's out? Thank you.
So Chair, with no time on the clock, you'd appreciate we're in third reading today, and today's the first committee I could have come to for comments. So what staff did is we prepared a staff level technical summary to the province and submitted it through the EBR registry. I also went to the co-chairs of planning and the chair of ARAC, who also has a planning responsibility, and asked them to submit a specific request to the standing committee reviewing the legislation to ask them to delay the implementation of the zoning penalties for fees by a year to give us time to at least adapt site plan and then tackle zoning. The strategy we discussed with the chairs is if we were going to ask for one thing and get one thing that would actually help us, that was the one thing. Unfortunately, neither the government nor the opposition moved any amendments at committee on that regard, despite the request that we made. And I can tell you that in talking to my counterparts around the province, people in comparable positions, many other municipalities made a similar request.
Okay, thanks very much. And thank you to your team for holding down the city during COVID and getting all of the work that needs to be done. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Steve, thanks to you and your department, with whom it's always a good, productive, professional relationship. I am always happy to be working with the planning department. I won't touch too much on Bill 109 because I know that's been well hashed out here, but I do have one question. I'm anticipating that it will pass. Site plan will no longer be delegated, or sorry, site plan will no longer go to council if the local councillor desires it, or planning committee rather. What is your anticipation with respect to letting councillors know that site plan applications have been filed and getting materials into councillors' hands so that we can do whatever kind of rapid lightning round of consultation with our communities that we feel is going to be appropriate?
So, Chair, Council raises a very good question, and we do not have this worked out yet because, as I said, I need to get someone in place and hack these processes for us. But I would imagine we take the same approach as other delegated authority applications. We have a number under a right-of-way and other permits where there's a councillor heads up on an application. Councillor is given an opportunity to provide us comments into the process. And if the councillor gathers some additional public feedback, that can come into the process as well. I mean, I think we will do that. I mean, ultimately, site plans will be in effect, there will be a person in the department who is a statutory officer delegated with the authority to issue those approvals under site plan, because the province views site plan as a very technical exercise. The province views it very similar to a building permit. So that will be a process where we will have to find a way to retrieve the various comments from the councillors and technical review agencies in a very quick way, and then get it into the process for approval.
Yeah, I know residents will sometimes look to us to use site plan as a second kick at the can of an unpopular development, but there is often from some of our more sophisticated community associations and neighbors, very technical tweaks that are helpful. And I'm looking forward to continuing to try to get those materials into residents' hands. So the questions maybe for Charmaine is around the public consultations. And I am really pleased to hear that you're considering keeping those online. Obviously in Kitchissippi Ward, we have a lot of development open houses. We pivoted to online early. The advantages of those have been, well outweighed the disadvantages of those. The environment is a safer place for developer staff, my staff, city staff who are attending. We get through dozens and dozens of questions because it's moderated, as opposed to, one question that oftentimes in a physical environment might take 10 minutes to ask. And, the timing is fantastic. We're seeing younger participants in our development open houses, because if you have two parents with young kids, one can continue to clean the kitchen, one can get the kid in the bath, and you can have the development open house open on your iPad. And then we can also record it and make it available to the entire community. Is there a way, though, to try to create the same kind of hybrid consultation that we are working on doing, for example, for our committees?
Thank you, Chair. For that question, Councillor Leeper, hybrid, I have looked into hybrid. It gets to be very expensive when you're looking at the different pieces. And also, I think would be very difficult when you're in person to have the conversation would be in person, and then people are, so I'm willing to try it out, but when I looked at it from expense, it is expensive. Ideally, what I would like is that we have some art will have to continue to be in person because of connectivity or the sensitivity of the topic. We did, even during COVID, Heron Gate, we did offer in person. Obviously, we took all the necessary precautions. So there's some that we will have to do hybrid. I'm looking forward to trying that out, but there is a significant cost to that for the technology.
I'll be following that, because the open houses that I do, I don't think I have the staff or the financial resources to try to do hybrid. I think I'm going to have to pick one or the other. And right now I'm leaning very, very strongly towards my consultations continuing to be online. And I think the developers have pivoted really well to that as well. So Steve, with respect to the refusal, you touched on it a moment ago. It was one paragraph in the report that you've put in front of us. Under what circumstances, maybe more fully explained, could you see the department issuing a rapid report to Planning Committee, refuse this application?
So, Chair, I think the most likely scenario where I could see this playing out is, we often see, there's a whole set of studies that come in with a planning application, and sometimes there could be 15 different studies. And some of them are the types that we can work through quickly and resolve them. But if somebody came in with a proposal where there were significant engineering issues, it was very obvious right up front, we could refuse the application saying, there's no way we're going to get this sorted out in 60 days. We're refusing you effectively without prejudice from you filing a new application once you have a better report. But it'll be a quick, we're not, we make a quick decision that we're not going to get this fixed within the timeline. And, Mr. Mark and I have not talked about this as far as the appeals are concerned. There's no such thing as a without prejudice refusal. It's a refusal is a refusal is a refusal. But I do think it might send a message to an applicant that their best strategy is to refile the application. And if we threaten it, maybe they'll withdraw the application, fix it, and refile it with a better chance of success. So, I want to talk to the industry about how this plays out as well, because it's not in their interest to tie everybody up in legal proceedings with OLT. It's like, it's a waste of taxpayers' dollars and a waste of their dollars. But, we're forced to think about strategies like this with the way the legislation is going to work.
In the past year, how many applications might have been subject to that same rapid refusal approach?
It's not the department's practice to issue rapid refusal. We just basically say that it's a deficient report, fix it, and we'll get back to you when you fix it. We don't take a refusal request forward in a situation where the applicant has a reasonable chance to correct the matter or address our concerns.
But in
You know,
how many cases are you seeing those, clearly deficient applications?
It'll be
5%.
It will vary on the type of application, the situation. I raised the issue of legal outlet, for example, where we have to sort out through a drainage engineer process. This is Dave Ryan's team who does formal drainage engineers reports. Those things can take 2 years plus to resolve. So the application would be, yes, Chair Moffat's correct, there are instances of 5. So in those situations, what hope do we have of meeting the timeline? So we would refuse it as the application is being premature until the drainage engineer issue is worked out. So those are very common examples where it is. We have instances, for example, in ARAC files where we have concerns about drinking water, where we ask for additional work to be done. And a lot of those get held up for a long period of time because of rationalizing the safety of the drinking water. Those files would have to just be turned down quickly in the new regime and come back to us when you have a better quality report. So that's not the way I prefer. I mean, I prefer to continue to working with applicants and resolve the issues, but I think our hands are going to be tied. And I think this is a technique we're going to have to use. The other thing we're exploring, I'm sorry, Chair, for taking so much time, but this is important. In the Heritage Act, we have firm timelines where we must make a decision or something is deemed approved. We have used a technique where we've asked applicants for a waiver of that right to have their file approved if we're close and we're going to get there in a couple more weeks. So we might explore that technique as well. And that's in the world of having a constructive relationship with everybody in the process, if people are willing, that might be a valid technique. But again, none of these have been explored legally yet because this is all new ground.
I think with my impression is that with some of our larger and more sophisticated builders, they recognize that it takes the time it takes to get through some of the technical issues and probably aren't likely to nail us to the wall on timelines. But not everyone is a large and sophisticated builder who can afford to be patient. So I appreciate the care that you're taking with this issue. One final issue I want to raise. Steve, you and I have had numerous discussions over the past several years about infill construction and building code services. I was out Sunday night to another infill location where property damage is being done. It was resurgent as an issue last summer after a couple of quiet summers. And I'm just wondering, what kind of resources or what is your outlook for resources that can be brought to bear on infill construction projects that are going south?
So, Chair, we have a number of initiatives. To the point Councillor Leeper raises worries me too, and the chief building official as well. So we have just introduced, they're hot off the press, new requirements for geotechnical engineering and foundation engineering reports when property is being constructed very close to the lot line in an infill situation. Very, very concerned about this. We've had multiple instances of this. So these are new engineering requirements that are now being implemented. If the permit was issued last year, they wouldn't have been subject to that because this is brand new. We are also issuing shortly an updated best practices for good neighbor construction practices in infill situations. I know that's close to Councillor Leeper's heart. I promised him several years ago we would get this done. He asked for it coming out of a community meeting, and we're on the verge of releasing that as well. And again, we are chief building official and I are looking at our engineering staffing to assess whether or not we have sufficient engineering support and building code services in these matters. So that's a conversation. And again, if we feel we need more resources, we will be back.
Yeah, please ask for those because we are intensifying. The low-rise neighborhoods are going to intensify. The comprehensive zoning bylaw review next term of council is going to introduce the potential for more infill in our low-rise neighborhoods. And when relationships between infill builders and their immediate neighbors become fraught, and when there are property damage issues, it damages trust in the city. It damages trust in the councillors, and those residents have to deal with a lot of stress. So I look forward to everything that you can do to help us mitigate some of that infill is coming right across Ottawa. All right. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you, Councillor Leeper, for raising that. Councillor Meehan.
Hi, good morning, Planning Committee. I just want to go back to Bill 109 one more time, and I just wanted to see if, ask Steve Willis a question about this, if you don't mind. I think we understand the intent of Bill 109, and but I'm wondering, after everything that I'm hearing about it, it seems to me that there's some unintended consequences, especially to the city of Ottawa, impacting planning staff. We're not sure if we can meet the deadlines or the timelines that it sets out. Have we given any thought to perhaps writing the minister to spell out the consequences of this bill? And I question whether or not we're the targets that we've set, hoping to expedite the planning process and get more houses built is actually realistic. Mr. Willis, have we considered writing the minister and asking for some amendments that perhaps could help us out?
So Chair, the councillor raises an interesting point, and I'll come back to the suggestion in a slightly different way. But on Bill 109, this legislation has gone through it at lightning speed through the province. And we contacted ministry staff on a staff-to-staff level to raise some smaller technical issues that we thought some amendments could clarify matters. We submitted through the EBR registry to the legislature comments on behalf of council where we indicated council had no time to comment. So this is a staff generated comment, council, and we'll circulate those to planning committee members, that what we sent. And I asked the co-chairs of planning, the chair of ARAC, to send the most urgent request to the province directly to the standing committee that was reviewing the bill. The government was determined to do this, and I'm not going to, it's not appropriate for me to comment on a political way, but the council makes an interesting suggestion that with the bill having been adopted, when staff reports back on what might be unintended consequences, we may be able to quantify and qualify what they might be, and then offer committee at the point we bring our report back, some suggestions on what to ask the ministry for in some further changes in the future.
I think that might be a good consideration given, what we're seeing here. I mean, we have a good staff that are working as fast as possible. Of course, yeah, some of the applications are not, all the I's are not dotted and the T's aren't crossed, and we see that. But I mean, the impact of not meeting some of the deadlines is going to blow back on all of us. And I don't think that that's going to expedite or streamline the process in any way. And I'm sure that other municipalities are facing the same thing. So if we got together as a team, we reached out to other municipalities who could express the same concerns or the same, list the consequences, that maybe the minister would be more apt or more willing to consider some amendments that would, wouldn't penalize us for trying to do the best job possible, given the new bill and what it's intended to do. That's anyway, that's just my take on it. But I'm wondering if we could get other municipalities who are in the same boat if we band together and put some pressure on the minister before this election coming up in June.
So chairs, in the last 2 weeks, I've been in regular communications with the planning leads in Hamilton and Toronto to coordinate where we have common interests, our responses to the province, and that has been done. I am part of a group of senior planning officials across Ontario, and that group has submitted. The Big City Mayors Coalition has also submitted comments to the province on the legislation, and we've contributed ideas through that process. And AMO, Association of Municipalities of Ontario, has also submitted. So I think there's a lot of intermunicipal dialogue going on. We have to accept the reality that where we're at in the cycle of things, provinces clearly going to get this done. I think the councillor's suggestion about a after the fact report on implications to the ministry and asking for some refinements down the road is actually a good suggestion. And I'd like to take the councillor's suggestion to the department and see if we can bring some suggestions forward to the committee.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Willis. Yeah, we don't, we don't want to stymie the process. If anything, we want it streamlined. But if it's too strict, if it penalizes us, too much, I can't see it benefiting anyone. So anyway, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the report. Listening to, I'm sorry, I've been in and out, but because I've been dealing with other things too, but just listening to the comments from Councillor Leeper and on infill and the whole good neighbor policy. I understand Toronto has one, and I've looked at it, and I think that that's definitely a way to go. The more conversations with neighbors, the better. Sometimes we as councillors have to force the situation, but there's no real process for it. And it would be helpful to have that process. And I can give lots of examples already. Infill is coming to Bayward, and we're seeing it. So I appreciate any work that's done on that. And it's, I don't know if this fits in, but one of the things I've discovered is in some of these infill is the lack of observation of how it reflects to the neighbors adjoining, such as privacy. There's the engineering concern is a big one, and that's obvious. Drainage is an issue. That's something that's measured. But issues of privacy when somebody's had almost vacant lots next to them, and then they have houses that are looking right in their windows, it's not taken into consideration much. I don't know if that's, how that can be dealt with, but that's another issue that has come up because you have houses that face the front, face the back, and that's their front window, but they're looking into someone's backyard. And that just came about when I see these new designs of trying to have more units on a smaller lot, and getting 4 units on something that had a single family home. And I appreciate the efforts to do that, but that was one of the consequences, and I saw it myself, and it's like unintended. So it's another thing to look at. In terms of the consultations, I hope we can work towards hybrid. I think has been a lot of efficiency in having consultations with the community relatively quickly set up by Zoom, virtual. And there's efficiencies in being able to have people write out their questions in chat. When you have a meeting with 185 people, and most of them have the same questions, but writing them out and presenting them so that we can read them and get answers and get lots of information to them has been very efficient. And it's, if they don't like it, they're not going to like it, but they're getting their answers, and that's been very helpful. So I would hate to lose that. And I know the city is, when they do their consultations, there's been efficiencies there too. So I hope we can have that. And in terms of the expense of hybrid, I think we still have to look at it. It's got to come. It just has to. Even before, it's funny, before COVID hit, I had people asking me, can I come to the meeting even though I'm not going to be there? And we put them on FaceTime. So that was in 2019. Before the pandemic, and we were using FaceTime to invite people into a meeting to ask questions. So I don't believe it can't be done. I believe that we just need to work through it and make it a priority. The pandemic has taught us a lot in terms of that we can move faster on things if we have to. So I hope we do look at that, because there's definitely going to be a need if hybrid is going to be everywhere. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
So Chair, if I can break down a couple things. So the councillor reminded me, just for comments, that going back in time, I can't recall, Councillor Leeper can correct me, but I think it was 3 years ago, Councillor Leeper convened a panel with GOBA and FCA to talk about how we could get better information out on good neighbor practices. And we committed as a department to update some old material that really did do that, but hadn't been touched in about a decade. And we did do that. And I do remember now that Councillor Kavanagh did forward me the Toronto example about a year ago as well, which helped us because we've adapted ours. And I believe Charmaine's indicating to me that we're probably a week away from issuing the new document, which is the new best practices for infill. I think it's just in translation. We're resolving that right now, and we'll have it out very shortly. And we think it'll be a new tool. It'll be handed out to people who are doing infill projects, and it addresses many of the issues. To deal with the issue of, just to clarify for the councilor's benefit, when we talk about hybrid are online plus in-person meetings. Yeah. And there are situations where that's really important, especially in communities that may not have access to internet as well as others. And we've had in certain very specific files, such as Herongate, it was very appropriate to run both, and we would do it in those situations. But the department's leaning very heavily towards retaining online because our participation rates are much higher. The diversity of participation is much higher, and we're having high level of satisfaction in that. So I think what the councillor is interpreting about retaining the online, we absolutely want to retain that element. I think it's easier on people, and we want to do that. And I think the council made a comment on privacy, which is always a challenging issue because we really don't have regulatory powers to regulate for privacy in Ontario. That doesn't actually exist. It's not a position we could defend, especially when we're trying to have intensification in the city. But I think sensitive design by architects goes a long way in resolving those issues, and that is something we're trying to encourage people to work through those issues with their neighbors in the process.
Thank you. The Committee of Adjustment is just mentioned in this report. Yet for the average person who's dealing with stuff happening in their community, Committee of Adjustment's a big deal, and I understand they're reviewing themselves. Do you have any further comments? I know we're supposed to be arm's length from Committee of Adjustment, but it does affect communities, and they want to see a better process for their involvement.
So, Chairs, the Committee of Adjustment does not report through the department. They report through the City Clerk's office as an outside regulatory body. The Committee of Adjustment is independent and arm's length, and our role as a department is how we provide comments to committee. And there have been several comments through councillors and even committee members about, is the department prepared for a shift in time to more planning applications actually coming through Committee of Adjustment? If you look at the City of Toronto, for example, the vast majority of big development projects only go through the Committee of Adjustment. So there actually are some, they don't have as many situations where it's rezoning. So we could see, as the city becomes more urban, a shift. So as part of the department's longer term review of how we're deploying our resources, where we're looking at how we comment to the Committee of Adjustment more effectively. I'm not going to comment on the committee's own review of their own operations. I'm not in a position to comment on that. That's the Secretary Treasurer's position to do that. And then any further matters should be matters Council considers under the governance review.
That's very interesting that you mentioned that. Under the transition to more, we're going to see more Committee of Adjustments, or that's what's happening in Toronto. Under our new official plan, is that something that could happen? And where is that? I apologize if you've answered this question already.
No, Chairs, it made me clarify. It's just the nature of the bigger city situations where a lot of development approvals end up going through the Committee of Adjustment through some revisions. Once we have a modernized zoning bylaw that is not leaving a lot of questions out on the table like we did before to capture Section 37, once it's actually more clear and it matches the official plan, there'll be fewer and fewer rezoning applications naturally, and more matters will be resolved through the Committee of Adjustment. So there'll be a shift to that in time. That's the natural evolution as the city becomes bigger. And so again, the department's looking at how we respond to that. How are we prepared for that shift that is likely to happen? And so it is about, are we putting the same level of review? Should we up our level of review? Should, do we need more senior people involved in certain files? Those are questions we're looking at ourselves.
Thank you. Where is the new official plan? Are we getting any information back of when it'll be approved?
So chairs, as a result of Bill 109, the approval of the plan is on hold pending Bill 109. The province decided to put our plan and multiple plans in Ontario, I think we're about 5 different plans, on hold until after Bill 109, because Bill 109 introduces new powers to the minister with respect to seeking the opportunity to refer all or part of the plan to the tribunal for a hearing. So the province made as we understand it, made a decision not to comment on anybody's plan, but they're treating everybody the same. So we're all put on hold until the new legislation's in place. And then we have a provincial election immediately afterwards. So I would be very surprised if Ottawa saw an approval of its new official plan before a new cabinet sworn in provincially after an election. I believe we will have to wait for that.
Yes, that's a big, we'll see. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I want to just add on the benefits of the online meeting, 2 things that I've really appreciated over the last couple of years. One is the ability to have an archive of those and go back. I was prepping before it was deferred, prepping for the Roosevelt item, and we're able to go back and check out an early public meeting to clarify something. And I've been able to tune in myself to some other councillor-led meetings over the last couple of years that I would probably not make the trip and drive across to other wards to attend, but I could tune in online. And the other thing I've appreciated is just the more constructive tone that I found the online meetings take. Sometimes the in-person meetings can really almost turn into a bit of an angry mob. And I don't see that happening in the online meetings, which is a positive. And I mentioned that because we had a meeting just before the pandemic, and a resident came up to me afterwards and said, I wanted to participate and share some feedback, but I was really afraid that I'd be shouted down by my neighbors. And despite our best efforts to make it a constructive and safe space, there are people who do feel, rightly so, very uncomfortable in some of the public situations. So online gives, I think, a more constructive and positive tone to community meetings. On the conditions, well, the idea of removing our ability to lift delegated authority on site plan or plan of subdivisions, I guess site plan. I do want to build on what Councillor Leeper was saying. We still need to have as councillors a role in that, and not just submitting comments at the get-go. I can think of several recent site plan lists of conditions where we have found small things that were missed that I don't think would have been caught unless we had those local eyes of the councillor and the councillor's team on it. So it's really important to still have a strong role for the councillor in that process. I have a question though, Steve. One of Minister Clark's statements and reasons for Bill 109 and the site plan issues and the approval issues was to take some of the politics out of the site plan process. In your experience, how much time do councillors add to the site plan approval process in Ottawa?
Jerry, you put me in a very difficult position with that question. As you can imagine, it varies depending on the site and the circumstances. I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to just give you another example. I'm going to deliberately avoid your question. Listen, the department has good relationships with all councillors, I believe, and I believe when councillors raise legitimate issues, we find a way to work with those issues that the councillors are raising, and I think it's a very collaborative process. The London, Ontario has a very different approach. In London, Ontario, site plans are approved through the Building Code Services branch. They treat it as a totally technical exercise, just like a building permit, and it is nowhere near the process that Ottawa has. And Ottawa has been one of the only municipalities in Ontario that even has public consultation in site plans. Most municipalities don't involve it at all. So, we are the anomaly in Ontario. I would venture to say we would have some of the poorest performing timelines in Ontario on site plan because of what we've chosen to do as a process. And those were conscious decisions several councils have made about the process we have. The province clearly wants us to look a lot more like London, and that's where we're evolving to. So, I can't comment really on the advantages or disadvantages of the involvement. If council wishes a role, we'll find a way to get councillors' input into the process. That's my commitment. However, we have to respect the new legislation because those are the rules we're working under.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, the other benefit about the online meetings is that we've recorded all our meetings and we've distributed them for those that can't even make it online. People are always asking for it, and so we publish it on in our website newsletter, and that's been a big bonus too. So and I suppose you could do that with an in-person meeting. In fact, I think we did do some back in 2019, but just another point of just trying to keep the information so that it's available for everyone.
Thanks, Councillor. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, then can we receive the 2021 year-end report?
Received.
Thank you. Okay. All right, we'll move to item 3 on the agenda. This is the zoning bylaw amendment for 3285 and 3305 Borrisokane Road in Barrhaven. We will have a presentation from the planner, Melanie Gervais. We will have a presentation from the applicants, and then we'll go to our delegation. So good morning, Melanie.
Good morning.
Whenever you're ready.
So I'm just waiting for the presentation to start up. All right, here it is. Right, good morning, co-chairs and members of Planning Committee. I'm Melanie Gervais. I'm file lead for the zoning bylaw amendment for 3285 and 3305 Borrisokane. Next slide. The subject site is located south of Strandherd, east of Borrisokane, and north of the Jock River. Next slide. The location map showing here the areas to be rezoned. The rezoning will accommodate the development of a low-rise residential subdivision of 942 units and 2 city parks. The area are mostly zoned development reserve, with portions also subject to floodplain overlay, as shown by the hatched area on the location maps. The residential portion, area A on the map, are proposed to be rezoned to R3YY with exception, which is a residential zone, and lands to be dedicated to the city as parkland and as natural areas are proposed to be zoned parks and open space. And this is the area B on the location maps. And some of the lands will remain also DR, which is the development reserve zone. The floodplain overlay will also be updated to reflect the RVCA's most recent update to their regulatory floodplain mapping, as confirmed by the RVCA on March 22nd, 2022. Areas to be removed from the floodplain are shown in dark gray, and areas to be added to the floodplain are shown in light gray, and those are mostly located around the boundary of the subdivision. Next slide, please. A cut and fill permission was issued by the RVCA on November 8th, 2019 to remove the majority of the subdivision lands from the floodplain. Works were completed, and in July 2020, the RVCA updated their regulatory mapping, which was then followed by an update to the city's floodplain overlay through an omnibus bylaw in 2021. Additional works have now been completed to the limit of the 2019 cut and fill permission. So these works have been reviewed and approved by the RVCA. The RVCA provided the city with the data set reflecting their updated regulatory floodplain. And in accordance with section 481 of the current official plan and section 1011 of the new OP, this is the data set that was utilized to update the city's floodplain overlay as it was shown in the previous slide on the location maps. So the Conservation Authorities Act gives powers to the conservation authorities to identify and manage natural hazards, such as floodplain, and to grant permissions within area of natural hazards, including alterations to watercourses. It's important to note that while the provincial policy statements do not permit development within the floodplain, this does not account for the ability of the Conservation Authority to update mapping and approve cut and fill permits as part of their programs and services under the Conservation Authorities Act. And furthermore, the city has a memorandum of understanding with the local conservation authorities, whereby the city commits to requesting the conservation authorities to participate in a variety of Planning Act applications. In turn, the conservation authorities commit to provide a review of Planning Act applications and technical reports submitted to the city, including their review of natural hazards on the city's behalf. And they review these reports to ensure that provincial interest in natural hazards and hazardous sites and the CA regulatory requirements are addressed. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, it's staff recommendation that Planning Committee recommends Council approve the amendment to the zoning bylaw to permit a low-rise residential subdivision. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Melanie. Just before you started, I saw Councillor Leeper's hand up just at the very last moment. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. And I don't want to catch the applicant off guard. I am contemplating bringing a motion as part of this. We're going to be hearing, I believe, from a delegation who has provided his comments to the committee in writing. And as part of those comments, he is making 2 recommendations to committee. And so as we continue to hear from the applicant, I just want to put it on the table that I'm thinking about a motion that would formalize his recommendations to put a holding zone on the zoning with respect to the floodplain overlay until such time as an interagency meeting can be convened with staff from the city, the conservation authorities, the ministries, to clarify responsibilities, with the results of that meeting to be reported back to Planning Committee. And another hold that an ongoing Rideau Valley Conservation update of Jock River sub-watershed plan be completed prior to the zoning bylaw approval, so that findings can be factored in land use to be approved in the zoning bylaw to provide required flood and erosion controls. It's a bit more formal than that, and if I put the motion forward, I'll ask that it be put on screen. But I do want to alert committee members that I'm contemplating asking for a couple of holds on the zoning, pending what I hear from delegations and from the local councillor as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Leeper. So we're going to go now to a presentation from the applicants. We have Frank Cairo from Kyvan, Patrick Harrington from Aird Burles, and Jocelyn Chandler from GF Saber and Associates. Welcome, and I believe you have a presentation. So when that's up on screen, you can start.
So thank you very much, Co-Chair Gower and members of Planning Committee. We appreciate the time today to hear from us. I'll jump right in. There will be some technical questions, I'm sure, and following the presentation today, I have some supplementary slides that might help address some historic technical questions that might arise. First slide, please. Yeah, so the subject lands we've all seen. These, just to point out quickly, are the Phase 2 lands. The exact same discourse and discussion was held during the Phase 1 zoning bylaw approval 2 years ago. Next slide. The conservancy lands where this zoning bylaw amendment is taking place form a vital connection point between the town center, plus rapid transit and employment areas both north and south of the site. And the site is fully serviced with all the external servicing in place and is completely in consistence with the both provincial policy statement, but also the City of Ottawa's OP. Next slide. We're very excited about our opportunity to improve the restoration corridor, restore and improve the riparian corridor of the Jock River, and activate recreational opportunities within the floodplain and areas not in the floodplain that will be part of the plan of subdivision. A variety of activities will be part of this overall program, which will connect to the Rideau River and actually right up into downtown through the Ottawa River. Next slide. We'll just quickly flip through so that many members of committee can get a sense. This slide, the next one, and the following one, just for how this activation of space and place with the new residents and neighborhood with these existing environmental areas will serve a community benefit beyond just for those that live in this neighborhood. Next slide. Architecture is being completely reinvented for this community. massing models and streetscape patterns that'll be very, very new for Ottawa, but also showcase the latest in materiality and also urban design principles and carbon emissions will all be part of this neighborhood. Next slide. And if you continue through the next two slides, we're focusing on a range of home designs and product that will actually meet various income levels and household demography. Next slide. Next slide. Just south of this site is actually a facility called the Advanced Building Innovation Company facility that we had brought forward for approval in past years, which is now fully operating. If you go to the next slide, there's 400 jobs that we've located here that are immediately in proximity to the site. Next slide, where we will be manufacturing all of the homes in this community at this location to create a carbon neutral production pipeline for all homes on site. And we're doing that also with waste being zero. Recycled waste products are all part of our facility. The facility is up and operational, and I'd love to tour any member of planning committee that would be interested in seeing this on site. Next slide. And so some key facts in closing. I don't have a ton of time to go through a full description of context or provincial policy related to floodplain modifications that we had previously done in 2019. But I can say that what we're talking about today is the implementation of a draft approved subdivision plan, completely consistent with the official plan in the city of Ottawa, both in existing form, but also in the future official plan form. And we prevented the need to expand the urban boundary by over 100 hectares by harnessing this area, which was previously undevelopable by virtue of some floodplain modifications that, ran the test of all the different agencies involved, but also 42 independent experts that all looked at the file, and also a whole team of experts, both policy and technical, that have validated the work that's been done. No development here is being proposed in the floodplain. I just want to clarify that. A lot of policy concerns that have been raised in the past, and we'll probably hear from today, relate to policies surrounding homes that exist in floodplains. I just want to be clear, there is no floodplain where homes are being proposed. There never will be a home in a floodplain within this subdivision plan. And today's zoning bylaw amendment is merely the implementation of a draft plan of subdivision that has already been approved by the city of Ottawa. Thank you very much, and I'm free for questions. We also have members of the team, both from JFSA, the technical side, but also legal expert if there's questions. We also don't have to go much further unless there's anything specific that any member of the committee would like to understand about the file.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we will be coming back to you after the delegation for questions, and there may be issues raised that committee will want to get some clarification on. So thank you for the presentation. We'll go now to our delegation. It's Ted Cooper. Not sure if Ted is on screen yet.
He's just joining us momentarily.
There, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Good morning, Ted.
Good morning. Yes, I have some slides that I've had prepared.
Yes, they're up on the screen now.
Thank you. I work for the city, but my comments made herein reflect my personal opinions. Lost floodplain storage and inadequate flood and erosion stormwater controls and the conservancy development will nullify the public benefit of my successful appeal of rezoning at 3500 Jockvale Road that was intended to allow development of floodplain. I'm particularly concerned about aggravation of existing flood levels and erosion conditions in the area of the Heart's Desire community. Next slide, please. Next slide. 13 years ago today, April 14th, 2009, following a personal submission made to the Planning Environment Committee, staff was directed to convene an interagency meeting to discuss the same sort of issues I have with the Conservancy development. Another such meeting should be convened. RVCA is currently updating the Jock River Subwatershed Plan, which could identify the need for flood and erosion controls. As Mr. Mark is quoted in a CBC story following my appeal of the downstream bylaw amendment, RVCA identified the need for additional land to be zoned green space. Rezoning approvals should be deferred until RVCA's subwatershed study is completed. Next slide. Oh, I'm on the right slide now. OPA 212 approved by council in 2018 removed use of two-zone floodplain policy.
Ted, I'm going to pause. I think we're on one slide ahead of you. Can we go back one slide to the?
Okay,
Good.
that's right.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, OPA 212 approved approved by council in 2018. We moved the use of two-zone policy in Reach 1 and directed floodplain mapping be updated so that all landowners could benefit equally from lower flood levels. Instead, alterations of the floodplain occurred in Ward 3, which will aggravate existing flood levels and erosion conditions in Ward 22. Next slide, please. The Conservancy development involves about 2,000 lots to be created on reclaimed floodplain because RVCA approved a fill permit where PPS policy does not permit site alteration. Contrast RVCA planner Glenn McDonald's remarks about the outcome of my OMB appeal to what RVCA just approved there in 2019. Next slide, please. RVCA's fill permit included conditions. Flood levels and velocities are to be monitored for 10 years. And if when impacts occur, additional earthworks are to be completed to the satisfaction of the RVCA. The RVCA takes no responsibility for any impacts. Next slide, please. What the fill permit has done is rewarded the developer in Ward 3 with an unprecedented floodplain development opportunity while placing residents and their properties in Ward 22 at unknown risk, without any consultation or notice. And if when impacts occur, the RVCA will decide what mitigation will be done. Is it acceptable that residents in Killermeans Ward be placed in a position of servitude to the upstream developer and RVCA? Next slide, please. RVCA has 2 incomplete contracts underway as committee is being asked to approve zoning of reclaimed floodplain with no land for stormwater ponds to provide flood or erosion control. This process is inconsistent with OP policy 4.7.6, which requires stormwater management to be informed by subwatershed plans. The Conservancy development was enabled by RVCA's fill permit. Why shouldn't its stormwater plan be informed by RVCA's subwatershed plan? Next slide, please. The city has an MOA with the RVCA. Note the commitment RVCA made to taxpayers and Heart's Desire, that it would review technical studies in the context of Province of Ontario policies and guidelines. Next slide, please. The 2002 M&R Technical Guide and the MOA are 2 key documents that should inform decisions for the Conservancy development. Next slide, please. The guiding principles behind the PPS listed in the M&R Technical Guide are presented verbatim. The RVCA fill permit approved for the Conservancy development is inconsistent with all guiding principles. For example, RVCA approved the fill permit in 2019, commenced its subwatershed study in 2020, allowed the draft plan to be approved in 2021, and are now supporting the zoning bylaw amendment in 2022 with its subwatershed study incomplete. The technical guide states proper floodplain management requires flood erosion hazards to be simultaneously recognized and addressed in a manner that is integrated with land use planning and maintains environmental ecosystem integrity. Next slide, please. The province has created flowcharts to assist conservation authorities with coordinating their review of plans of subdivision and processing fill permit applications. The process requires the fill permit approval to occur after the Planning Act process has been completed. Next slide, please. The MOA includes coordination of stormwater management between the city and the RVCA during the review of development applications. The RVCA's responsibility is to establish the flood and erosion control criteria. The city's responsibility is to ensure stormwater infrastructure performs to the criteria set by the RVCA. Text at page 19 of the committee report indicates only the city was satisfied with the stormwater plan, likely because RVCA's subwatershed study remains incomplete. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Yes, I encourage committee members to support my 2 recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ted. You're just in under the wire there. Good timing. There's a couple questions for you from councillors. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. So Ted, I've taken your recommendations and I've written them up as a motion that could be voted on by this committee. Can you unpack for me what would you hope the outcome of those recommendations would be? And if I may, obviously this is pretty technical and it's outside of the immediate experience of many of the councillors around this table. What is your fear about what may transpire if we approve today's staff recommendations, and how would your recommendations mitigate against the outcomes that you are concerned about?
So my primary concern is, I would say, of the two issues between floodplain management and stormwater management, my primary concern is erosion impacts that are likely to occur without any controls. The Council and the National Capital Commission in 2020 adopted the climate change projections, and what they reveal is that there will be an increase in rainfall in the shoulder seasons. So what I am most concerned about is an inch or two of rain occurring when you have the spring freshet. And in the Jock River, the spring freshet can last for 1 or 2 weeks. And so what we'll be seeing in the future is uncontrolled urban runoff adding to the spring freshet. And it's at that time of year, the banks of the river system are most vulnerable to erosion. And unless there are controls put in place, we will see an acceleration of the erosion. And there are parts of the river system where the what's called the meander belt encompass parts of the Heart's Desire community. So if we do not get on top of this issue over the long term, it'll become a major financial burden on city taxpayers to prevent a serious problem.
How is that related to the report that we're being asked to approve today?
Yeah, normally when you'd see a plan of subdivision, go through a plan of subdivision process, there'll be land set aside for stormwater blocks where you construct the stormwater pond. And what you need to do is hold back the runoff from the development area and slowly release it at what you'd say is pre-development rates. Now, normally this type of planning occurs at a sub-watershed level. So you have to identify, proper controls to release into the river so that you don't aggravate runoff conditions in the river such that you'll lead to additional flood and erosion issues. So, we've seen that the RVCA has a subwatershed study underway, and it's to include public consultation. And I think it's important, because the fill permit process doesn't allow any involvement of third parties. And this is why normally the fill permit process comes at the end of the Planning Act process, not at the not before the Planning Act process starts. So I think it's important that RVCA presents its findings to the public, just so that we know that we're not going to be dealing with any lasting erosion and flooding issues downstream. My concern is not that the Barrhaven Conservancy development area will be subject to flooding. That's not the issue. The issue is it creating problems elsewhere.
So the Conservancy is going on land that has been reclaimed from a cut and fill, and the RVCA has said that cut and fill is appropriate. They've approved that.
I wouldn't. If I can just interject, that's not in fact what they said. There are conditions attached to the fill permit that require monitoring, and if the conditions show that there's an impact, they have one of the conditions is that they have to do additional earthworks. So how, like, without the monitoring program completed, how do we know how much of the land can safely proceed? Because one of the conditions says that the applicant would have to do additional earthworks.
So is it premature to approve a rezoning today without understanding what effect the fill and cut may have as observed over time now that it's actually in place.
That's correct. And if you look back to the guiding principles in the M&R technical guideline, which state is, that's the guideline. And it says that you have to defend your decisions on the basis of what's in that guideline. The proper sequence here is to sort all of these things out before the fill would have been placed.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for the time being. I see Councillor Meehan has questions as well. Thank you, Ted.
Thanks, Councillor Leeper. Worth noting too, we do have a representative from Rideau Valley Conservation Authority with us. So when we get to questions for staff, they'll be able to answer any specific questions if they arise. Councillor Meehan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, committee, and thank you, Ted, for the presentation. Yes, I do represent some of the communities downstream from the Barrhaven Conservancy, and I am concerned about the impact of what we're doing here. Just first off, Mr. Cooper, can you explain just briefly your credentials in this? I would assume that I believed you to be an expert in the floodplain and drainage. Can you just explain your credentials?
Yes, I have a master's degree in civil engineering, specializing in water resources engineering, and I've been working in this area since 1988.
So what you're doing as a member of the city staff is it's pretty brave, actually. You're coming out and challenging the staff reports. Why are you doing that?
Well, as I explained, these are my this is a private or a personal submission. I already appealed a previous zoning, and I had success at the Interior Municipal Board. And I think it's only fair that I should have had an opportunity to participate in the decision making system before the fill was placed. And I was never afforded that opportunity. And I think if any developer, downstream would have been impacted by such a decision, they would have chosen just to speak out about it as well.
It is very complicated when it comes to the approvals, whether it's the Rideau Valley Conservation or the City of Ottawa, whether it falls within the provincial policy statements. But your belief is that the decision-making was actually flawed here. And for what end, do you believe?
Well, I don't know about for what end. I'm like from a technical and planning perspective, the issue here really is that the provincial policy statement does not allow, like when council said that you're not allowed to apply two-zone policy, that means the entire floodplain is considered floodway, and you're not allowed. It's not only are you not allowed to develop it, you're not allowed to alter it to change the landform. So somehow what happened was that the Conservation Authority processed the fill permit application as if it was two-zone, but council said you're not allowed to use two-zone, and this in here is how the process sort of went off the rails, and this all occurred without any public consultation.
Which brings us back to what happened in July of last year. July of last year, we dealt with this same issue, but on a different application. And we came to the conclusion that communities downstream should be apprised or informed when anything upstream is altered. And are we fulfilling the intent of what we decided last year when it comes to this application today?
Well, in this application, what you see is a second fill permit, which just sort of fills in around the edges. And I would say that unless the downstream residents were pre-consulted about that, I would say no, that doesn't meet the intent of the direction given last year.
Yeah, we haven't done that. So Mr. Cairo says, you know, that part of his presentation is that none of the Barrhaven Conservatory will be built on floodplain, but that's because we've reclaimed the land. Is that correct?
Yeah, like I'm not disputing that the conservancy lands, you know, they won't be subject to flooding, but that's because they brought in lots of fill to keep the water off their property.
So as an expert in this, we cannot guarantee that the communities downstream won't be flooded at some point. I live near the Jock River. I walk by the Jock River every day. We're seeing the Jock River. The Jock River is impacted by a lot of decisions, and it's up and down several times a year. What do you think ultimately is the big danger, and how real would that danger be in your assessment?
Yeah, well, right now, like I believe the Heart's Desire community dates back to, I think, 1970s it was built. So it sort of was constructed before the province adopted, you know, a policy-based system. And likely parts of that development wouldn't have been allowed to be developed because in fact, there are some lots and Goodwood Drive that are within the 100-year floodplain. So if flood levels are increased, those residents had a right to object to having to take on water that once occupied the lands upstream. So, but as I say, I don't think it's going to impact. Well, I don't know. I don't know. I have all the details. But if it's going to be occupying more of people's property as opposed to getting into their basements, but it does occupy Goodwood Drive, and if it gets to a depth, you know, often when you have flooding and things, everything goes wrong. And if the depths are too high, emergency vehicles wouldn't be able to travel on Goodwood Drive. Okay. So these are all the kinds of things that should have been investigated before the fill was allowed to be placed.
Okay. Is there any way to mitigate any potential risk at this point?
No, not. Well, as I say, if you look at the guiding principles, all of these things are supposed to be sorted out before the fill is placed.
And if it does flood, there's nobody to go back on. No one's going to take responsibility. Is that correct?
Well, if I look at the fill permit, the Conservation Authority is taking no responsibility. And if you look in the zoning bylaw amendment or in the committee report, the city didn't identify any liability or risks. So, you know, it'll be the landowner down there having to sue somebody.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. I appreciate your input, Mr. Cooper. Thank you.
Hey, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm interested in this, and especially this time of year when we're in freshet season. I live near the Ottawa River, and of course, in 2019, we experienced flooding, and that was supposed to be the 1 in 100-year flood. I can't help but think about climate change and how what standards we had before of what we thought was flood zones may have changed. We take it very seriously here in this area. And I just wanted to know what your opinion is on that, because it seems that flooding could even be worse with climate change. And so we really need to watch those rules and regulations that are put in place.
On the Jock River, it's a little bit different. It's not the same size of system as the Ottawa River. There's some debate on whether or not with climate change, whether or not you'll see less snow accumulation in its headwaters. So depending on I think there's been some arguments, in fact, in the original official plan amendment application back in 2017, that because there could be less snow, in fact, flood levels, the 100-year flow could be lower in the future, and therefore climate change might actually improve things. The problem is that you don't have any certainty because, if you get a polar vortex for a certain length of time, despite the fact that it being warmer on average, in that particular year, you could see a lot more snowfall. So there isn't any certainty. So the way that the preferred approach to floodplain management in Ontario is a preventative approach. So if you don't know what the future holds, you're best to proceed cautiously. And but in terms of climate change, what the report from the city and the National Capital Region indicated was that you're going to see more precipitation over the winter period, and more of it, could be in the form of rainfall during the shoulder seasons. So that means that when the flood level is elevated, you'll have more rainfall occurring. So if you don't have stormwater controls, you'll see higher flood stages, and that's the period when you've got no vegetation protecting the banks, and that's where you'll see more erosion.
So vegetation, lots of greenery helps, I would think.
Oh yes, that's right, and that's what sort of when it's dormant, when the flows are the highest, and when you'd see the most erosion.
Okay, and is that something that's being recommended? I apologize if I missed that.
Yes, the Conservation Authority is currently updating its sub-watershed plan because there was a sub-watershed plan approved in 2007, but it didn't contemplate the development of the floodplain, or I should say the filling and development of the floodplain in the area of the Conservancy lands. So there is no plan available to inform stormwater management requirements as is required by official plan policy.
Should there be a recommendation to have more trees, for example, more greenery, things to absorb water?
I believe that in 2016, the RVCA undertook I think they call it a sub-catchment report, and they identified a number of locations within Reach 1 of the Jock River that have erosion problems, and they've identified the need for future works in those areas.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Menard.
Thank you. I'll be quick because my colleagues have asked very good questions. The sub-watershed report, do you know when that's supposed to come out? I'm sorry if we've already mentioned it, but I just want to be clear. The date that's supposed to be finalized?
Oh, I don't know. All I know is from looking at the RVCA website that they approved the contract back in, I think, November of 2020. And it indicated a need for a public consultation. So there, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any public consultation on it yet.
Okay, I'll ask the RVCA official we have with us later. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. I am seeing no more questions from committee members. So thank you, Mr. Cooper, for your presentation today.
Yep, you're welcome.
We will move back to the applicants. And so if any councillors have a question for the applicants in this, now is the time. Councillor Hubley is first.
Thank you very much, co-chair. Sorry, my voice is bad today. The couple of questions, if I may. One, the presentation you gave, Mr. Cairo, very impressive about the building material and everything, and that you're going to do it very close to on site. Yesterday, we dealt with high performance building standards. Would you know offhand if you're going to meet or exceed most of those building standards based on the material you're planning on using?
Thank you for the question to you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Hubley. The short answer is we've made a very concerted effort over the last number of years to address our carbon footprint as an organization, whether that goes into the homes when they're delivered to customers or in the production cycle of getting the homes built. And our efforts to date have been really front end to try to look at the whole environmental and ecological footprint of our activities. And so focusing on the actual production of homes, we felt was the number one priority. Once a home is closed and is an environmentally energy efficient product, it has a small or marginal uptick in environmental gain by making it more energy efficient. But really, as an industry, our big environmental gain is changing the way that homes are built, how the consumable products that go into a home are procured, and how homes are assembled, and how carbon can be mitigated in the production process. So I'd say that, coming back to your question about the high performance development standards, we look at every neighborhood from an overall ecological footprint approach. We're of the opinion that the neighborhood's footprint is more relevant than a home by home metric on energy efficiency. All homes in Ontario built under the new building code will be energy efficient. What makes our approach, I think, important to consider is that there's a lot of things that can get done at a neighborhood scale and through production that go even further than just whether or not a home, once it's closed, will perform energy efficiently over time.
Okay, thank you. The other thing, I see similarities here to your development that's in my area, known as the Monaghan Landing, and the amount of work that you did there along the spillway and everything, and as Councillor Kavanagh was saying about greenery planted in there, there's quite a bit of vegetation around there and so on, and it's become a major attraction for nearby residents because you included a pathway around it. So if anything, it's working to educate people on stormwater and nature and protect nature within our community. This looks to me, but I'd like to hear it from you. It looks to me that you're building on what you did there and the work you did with city staff to enhance the performance of the Monaghan drain so that there were no real runoff concerns to that development. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, so Councillor Hubli, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm very disappointed and quite honestly heartbroken by a lot of the comments that have been raised in this committee meeting by Mr. Cooper to allege that we haven't considered erosion, to allege that we haven't considered stormwater management, to allege that we don't have a subwatershed study. Those are all complete factually incorrect statements. We do have a subwatershed study that's been updated as part of our development program with a master servicing study that's been filed. The fill permit that was the result of many years worth of work with over 42 independent experts included a very, very deep level of learned understanding on the status of the Jock River, the future state of the Jock River, erosion, conveyance capacity, flood resilience, climate change and adaptation, 1 in 350, 1 in 500 year storm events. The fact that it's being reduced to a statement as if we haven't considered those facts is a travesty, and it's embarrassing, and it's a disrespectful remark to make when the Conservation Authority and the City of Ottawa worked so hard to develop a subdivision here that meets all provincial prerequisites, is consistent with the official plan, and should be a good news story for all of us. To go directly into your question about the Monaghan drain and the work that was done there, there's a lot of similarities, but I'll say that the Jock River corridor that's now being established as part of this development is one of the biggest restoration projects that exists in this region. We are replanting an agricultural edge that's in an erosive state. We're improving the setback to the river and we're enhancing it, improving the conveyance capacity. We have stormwater facilities within this complex of wetland framework that are all benefiting not only this neighborhood, but everyone downstream. We've considered engineering from immediate all the way upstream, kilometers and kilometers upstream, right through downstream to the Rideau River and beyond. To suggest for 1 second we haven't looked at that is completely wrong. So I hope I answered your question. I apologize. We're very passionate about stormwater management, floodplains, and drainage within my organization, but also the experts I brought with me today that could field questions if there are any. JFSA, who's a world-renowned expert and firm that conservation authorities use across Ontario for guidance in these matters, has been involved. I'm not sure why there's confusion that still persists, but every time there seems to be a planning application in this area, we're back to talking about issues from 2019. So my apologies if I've ranted too long, but I want to state on the record that we've been very responsible about this, as has city staff and as has the RVCA. There's been no short stepping on this project at all.
And I would agree with you, Mr. Cairo, in that I'm looking forward to what the RVCA is going to respond to the attacks on their credibility here. But just to be clear, city staff are supporting your application, right? The city engineers responsible for reviewing this project are supportive of your application, which is maybe why Mr. Cooper's doing this on his own, because he's not here representing the city. So can you confirm that city staff are supportive of the application?
So the application before committee today is a zoning bylaw amendment to implement a plan of subdivision and to reconcile a floodplain boundary line that needs to correspond with the RVCA's boundary line. RVCA determines floodplain limits. And in particular, there's been reference to this second cut fill permit. There is no second permit. All the work that's been done in the floodplain boundary adjustment we're talking about today is all part of that 2019 permit. So with respect to today's matter, city staff is in support and is recommending approval of the zoning bylaw. We're not relitigating the 2019 permit today. Ted Cooper's resource, or I should say recourse, if you would like to litigate that, and we reached out to Ted and he has not determined that it would be worthwhile meeting or reviewing the technical merits of the application or even the policy framework on this file, even though the concerns go back many years, he hasn't met with us. The door is still open to meet with him, but his recourse would be an appeal of the zoning bylaw if he so chooses.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's my questions for now until we get, you don't want questions of staff right now, correct?
Not yet.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me for this round. Thank you, Mr. Cairo.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you for being here today. My question is around waiting for the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority to complete the sub-watershed plan that's ongoing. If a hold were placed on the zoning to allow for completion of that study before the zoning would become final, what would be the impact to your development plans?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Leeper, and through you, chairs. Delay would be very problematic. We've been rushing to bring very needed and time-sensitive housing to market. There's over 100 families waiting to move into this community that bought homes. A delay would create obviously a lot of impact, not only for us producing the homes, but also for people that are desperately waiting to move in. I just want to be clear, going back to the sub-watershed study for a moment, that we have not only submitted, but have approval on sub-watershed work that was done as part of the plan of subdivision. The work that is being referred to as an update to the sub-watershed study in the area is actually in harmony with our approved subdivision plan. It takes into account our master servicing that was reviewed and approved as part of our subdivision. So there is no lack of information that we're waiting on. It's just simply an update to take into account all of the development that has occurred in the area. This is one part of that, but there's many other parts that need to be updated as well. But we have relied on an existing sub-watershed study that we updated with a master servicing study, and that was approved as part of our plan of subdivision process over a year ago.
Okay, no, and that's helpful. I haven't determined whether to move ahead with that or not, unless Councillor Meehan may want me to pull the trigger on that, in which case I will, but I appreciate that answer. And then, yeah, I would love to come down and see that facility. That's it looks like a fascinating spot. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to the chairs.
Okay, Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to go back to some of the history of this, because you had previously applied with RVCA and they had rejected that application at that time. And then it came back later on and was approved by the board. I'm sure Councillor Moffat and others would know more about that process. What was your understanding of why it was not approved by the RVCA when you first came with the study that you did in terms of the floodplain mapping and the concerns that they had raised at that time?
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Menard, and to you, co-chairs. There was not a refusal of any application by the RVCA. The Section 28 permit that was filed after years actually of pre-consultation and study with data sets and modeling work was approved following a series of rounds of comments between us and the RVCA. You may be referring to floodplain mapping updates that we originally requested get made without a Section 28 permit. The data set that we had filed in order to rationalize floodplain modifications related to 50 years worth of data that suggested that, as Ted Cooper had noted in today's call, that the snowmelt on rainfall events in the spring, which govern 1 in 100-year floodplains in the Jock River over this reach, had become less severe, and therefore flow rates in the spring were reduced from the previous floodplain mapping. And those reduction in flow rates would by default lower the 1 in 100-year water elevations, which we've actually monitored on site to be the case. The RVCA's preference after a long discussion was to hold off on mapping updates, to look at the merits of a cut fill application with hydrodynamic analyses and determine if cut fill was suitable within provincial policy. That doesn't mean that the floodplain mapping won't be updated again in the future as climate data, flow rate data, and other data is used to update floodplain mapping. So I know that there's a lot of confusion about the history on that, but there was never a refusal of any application by the RVCA. There was back and forth in comments, but there's never even been a concern about whether or not the application in its latest form after addressing comments met provincial policy or official plan policy. It was determined that it did, and that's why the permit was issued.
Okay, thank you for that. In terms of the RVCA's process now that they're undergoing, do you have any idea when that's supposed to finish up? Again, I'll talk to the RVCA official, but have you been part of that process? And do you know when it's going to be wrapping up?
So thank you again, Councillor Menard, and to you co-chairs. We actually have asked for an update. We are not part of the process. It's an independent process being carried out by the RVCA. We're aware of it. We are aware of the data set that's being used for it. But the latest update we got this week was that there is no date when they don't have a horizon date as to when that study will be completed. In part because it's not really a prerequisite for any development application currently. It's ongoing work that, in the years that will follow it, will also be updated again. Some watershed studies, as development applications come in, continually update themselves to take into account existing conditions. So I don't know if that answers your question, Councillor Menard, but we don't know the date on when that study will be finished.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm seeing no additional questions from committee members, so thank you to Frank and your team for answering questions today. We'll go now to questions for staff, and we do have Rideau Valley Conservation Authority representatives here as well, able to answer questions. So Councillor Meehan, you're the first with your hand up, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my question to RVCA is, did they impose any conditions on Kaivan for this application?
Chair, RVCA, Glenn McDonald, the Director of Planning Approval, is here. So I'll invite Glenn to respond.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, chairs, councillors. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Good morning.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the permit application was approved with some conditions, Councillor.
And what are those, and have those conditions been met?
The applicant has satisfied most of the conditions. There was a condition for a monitoring plan to be developed and implemented. So that is in process. And a lot of the other conditions were standard conditions that are implemented as the works proceed. Things like sediment erosion control, providing as-built grading plans, and similar items.
So when will they be completed?
Well, the monitoring plan is intended to be in place for 10 years. We spread it out over 10 years because we wanted to make sure that we could capture events that, well, basically higher flow events that would confirm that the modeling is accurate.
We've heard allegations today that Rideau Valley Conservation is not adhering to provincial policy, that it is not up to the Rideau Valley Conservation to come up with policy on this. Can you address that?
Well, I think it's
that the authority doesn't have the Conservation Authority doesn't have the authority to allow this cut and fill.
Well, it's important to remember that the application Kaivan submitted to the Conservation Authority was an application under Section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act. It was not a Planning Act application. So the applicant didn't require a Planning Act approval to undertake the site alterations that were associated with the cut and fill. So it wasn't a planning matter. They weren't making a decision on a planning matter that was guided by that would otherwise be guided by the PPS.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out exactly what that means. Who has the ultimate authority on this?
Well, the floodplain of the Jock River is regulated by the Conservation Authority under Section 28. So it is the Conservation Authority's purview through our executive committee, who heard the application, to decide whether or not that application was approvable. And the executive committee accepted the engineering analysis prepared by the proponent as reviewed by Conservation Authority staff. And they were satisfied that the application was approvable because there was no adverse impact with respect to flood and erosion control. They put the monitoring condition on as a conservative measure to monitor the situation over the 10 years. But the application itself stood on its own merits. They didn't. Like the condition for the monitoring was I guess I would describe it more as an add-on out of an abundance of caution.
It wasn't.
Yeah,
it wasn't prompted by doubt. That.
No, not at all. I mean, the committee. It seems to be implied today in some of the comments that have been made that the authority didn't exercise its due diligence when it approved this application, but that is far from the truth. I mean, there was a considerable amount of staff time and effort and back and forth between professional engineers and other professional staff to get the application to the point where there was a high degree of confidence that there would be no adverse impact with respect to the cut and fill.
Is there not, I profess I am not an expert on this at all, but I think of a science experiment where you have a floodplain and you take portions out of it and you fill them. The water's got to go somewhere. So where is it going to go in terms of this in this particular area?
Absolutely, that's a good analogy, and that's why the applicant's hydrodynamic analysis that was done had to account for how that water was going to be accommodated in the system, and through the fill and the cut that was done. They demonstrated that that water would be accommodated within the channel and not have any adverse impacts downstream. So there there were alterations undertaken to the landscape to accommodate the flow of the water that would normally be held back in the floodplain.
It seems, well, I mean, I guess we're going to keep our fingers crossed, but.
Well, I will say that like I said earlier, that our executive committee would never have approved the application if they didn't have a high degree of confidence that the tests under the Conservation Authorities Act had been met.
Okay, I'm gonna leave it there. There may be other questions, but thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. McDonald, for being here as well. I have a lot of faith and trust in the RVCA, and that's why I just want to go through some of the history so that I fully understand where we've come to. Back in 2017, Kaivan had approached you, the RVCA and the city, and then had a proposal to fill the floodplain with enough soil to raise the land above the flood levels. At that time, you rejected it, and I'm wondering, and I'll have a few questions, but why you rejected it at that time?
Well, as Mr. Cairo said, it wasn't an application that was rejected. It was a discussion, more like a pre-consultation in terms of how they wanted to approach it. But the thinking back in 2017 was that the 1 in 100 year flows on the Jock River were somewhat less than what the 2005 mapping was based on. So there was a lot of discussion about what that 1 in 100 year flow should be. The proponent did their own analysis. The Conservation Authority's engineering staff looked at that. We weren't comfortable with it. We had our own independent assessment done to look at the years of record for the gauge on the Jock River compared to the records of rainfall. And we and through our engineering consultant concluded that the flows used for the 2005 floodplain mapping were still relevant today. So we took the position that if the application was to move forward, or their proposal was to move forward, it had to be based on the flows that were used for the 2005 mapping.
Okay, very helpful and clear. Thank you for that. Kaivan followed up that first discussion with you with the OP amendment. And this was to allow that future residential development in what was currently the floodplain. And so because the modeling that they were showing, that Kaivan was showing, it was indicating that the flood line was lower than currently identified by the RVCA. And at that time, they were asking for the floodplain mapping study to be done. But the RVCA had reviewed their technical information and then concluded that as you were saying, the existing 2005 map was still valid. So you didn't support lowering the flood elevation or revising the mapping. Can you go into a little bit more on that decision?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to OPA 212. Yeah, so
that's correct.
Right. So when that official plan amendment was put forward, it was done so with I think the assumption that at that time was that there would be an updated floodplain mapping study. So it simply, that OPA simply stated that the kind of the dividing line between the hazard land, that being the floodplain, and what was to be developed as future residential would be determined by that updated mapping study. And like there were no changes to any lines or anything as a result of that amendment, because we didn't have an updated floodplain mapping study. So, but after that OPA was adopted, that's when it was determined that there was really no, from the Conservation Authority's perspective, that there was no value in undertaking an updated floodplain mapping study, because we were comfortable that the 1 in 100 year flow that was used in the 2005 mapping study was still valid. And we didn't want to spend, didn't make sense to spend, $150,000 or whatever to do a new floodplain mapping study that wasn't going to result in any significant change to the flow or to the lines on the map.
Understood, and appreciate again that clarity. That was followed by the cut and fill permit in 2019, and that was a very large cut and fill being discussed. Can you just go into that a little bit more in terms of how large a cut and fill we're talking about here in terms of its volume and scale?
The volume, my recollection is the volume was around 400,000 cubic meters, I believe. I think my colleague Eric Lalande is in the meeting as well. He might be able to answer that question a little more accurately than what I can at this point.
If I may, through the chair, I don't have the number memorized by hand, but I could look that up if you want the accurate number in just a second.
Great to see you or hear you, Eric. No, I think yeah, around the 400,000 is correct from what I recall as well. And I just, on that amount, like the scale of that amount, can you just go into, is that normal? Is that a very high amount? In terms of that amount, are there concerns with that amount of a cut and fill in this regard from RVCA in general, or how does it normally work when you have that large of a request?
Yeah, I just pulled up the permit. Yeah, so the number was about 407,000 cubic meters. And yes, I would say this is not a standard application that we would receive for a cut and fill, just given the volume. I can say that it is the largest cut and fill volume that we have ever had to consider. So it's not, this volume of fill is not what I would call a common request.
Okay, I appreciate that. In terms of, where we are now, the sub watershed study that is happening concurrently. I mentioned I'd ask about the date that is expected to wrap up and have results from. Do you have that approximately?
I can't give you a firm date, but I can give you an update as to the status. So the report is draft. There is a draft report that we have that our staff are reviewing, that city staff are reviewing as well. We are awaiting comments from the city on the report before those go back to the consultant. But the study has been underway for some time. We had a couple of delays because we were looking for some land use information from the city, and that kind of got caught up with the new official plan, and so there were some delays that we didn't anticipate. But it's certainly our intent to wrap this up as expeditiously as possible. We know it's important. And just a matter of clarification or a point of clarification, the subwatershed study we're referring to is the Jock River Reach 1 subwatershed study. That is actually a study that was led by the City of Ottawa, and certainly the Conservation Authority partnered with the city on that and participated in the study. But it was the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority that identified the need to update the section of the report that dealt with the current criteria for no quantity control for stormwater management on the lower reach of the Jock. So it's basically the Conservation Authority kind of investigating further or updating, I guess, a report that the city had already had in place.
Okay, understood. That's helpful as well. When this came forward, the reports that had been submitted and I guess peer reviewed by Kaivan, you had listed several cautions about developing within that what existed as the floodplain. Can you highlight what those cautions were? And what I'm getting to here is the level of risk that we're faced with. If there's a significant risk, then I want to make sure we take the time, have the watershed study completed, that we have the risk sorted out. So I just want to know about what risks may have been communicated at that time, and do those persist today?
Well, the risks were certainly pointed out to the developer in terms of making sure that, you know, at the end of the day, the Conservation Authority had to be satisfied before we issued the permit that there was not going to be any adverse impact with respect to flood levels or erosion control. And as I said earlier, the authority's executive committee accepted the applicant's engineering studies and the conclusions that there would be no adverse impact. I think it's also important to make a distinction here between, you know, what we're talking about adverse impact with respect to the cut and fill application, which the Conservation Authority is satisfied is not going to happen. But we're also talking today about adverse impact with respect to stormwater management. And the plan of subdivision has been draft approved with a condition that will require the applicant to adhere to whatever stormwater management criteria are in place at the time they make the application for approval of their stormwater management works. So that is a condition in the plan of subdivision that will speak to the quantity control issue. So and that's it's going to fall on the applicant to demonstrate how they're going to meet whatever that criteria is, or whatever falls out of the subwatershed study.
Very good, very clear. Again, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I mean, I'm taking your view of this very seriously because, as I say, I trust the RVCA and you do fantastic work. I deal with you folks a lot because of my ward. So, and Rita River running right through it. And so, you know, I always have very good dialogue with you. And that's why I just want to make sure we're considering all the risks here, and you're the trusted voice that I hear on this. The more you can give me, the better on this to feel like we're mitigating risks appropriately, given your expertise. And that the last point I'll just raise that sub watershed study. Do you see any reason to wait and see the results there? Given I guess they'll come later in terms of your application for when the build out occurs. Is that if that's the process?
Yeah, I mean,
be a reason to wait for that at this time, and see what that says before moving ahead.
It was never the Conservation Authority's intent to kind of change the rules of the game midway through a development process. We never thought that would be fair to any applicant. But I think we've, you know, through the working with the city on the conditions of draft approval, that we have built in accountability to whatever comes forward in the subwatershed study in terms of what the criteria might be for stormwater management. So, like I said, we're trying to move forward with that as expeditiously as possible. But no, it wasn't the Conservation Authority's intent to have the subdivision held up while that subwatershed study was being completed.
Okay, but if it reveals something that needs to change with the development, that'll be built in, or are we going to be at a later stage at that time? That's my question. Is can we?
Well,
yeah,
right. I think the onus will be on the developer to demonstrate how they're going to make the criteria work, and if that requires, you know, an amendment to the plan of subdivision, or how the, you know, the lots are laid out or whatever, then that's something that the developer is going to have to deal with.
Okay. Thank you. Very, very helpful in these discussions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, and Glenn, your answers have been extremely helpful today. Can I just ask maybe to restate what I think I heard you just tell Councillor Menard, which is that, is it fair to say that the subwatershed study that you're currently undertaking is unlikely to suggest that the fill and cut would need to be modified? That's done. The subwatershed study, however, might suggest mitigations for stormwater that will need to be implemented in the course of creating some of these subdivisions, and that there is a process in place whereby the developer is going to have to develop a stormwater management plan to the city's satisfaction that can be that will support the findings of the subwatershed study.
That is correct, Councillor.
Okay, sorry, it is a little convoluted again. I just want to make sure that I understand that. Which relates directly to my thoughts around holding up the zoning approval until that subwatershed study is done. But that doesn't sound like a productive path to take at this point. Now that I have a better understanding of what that is. I did want to double check on the original Section 28 cut and fill approval. I think Mr. Cooper has asserted that that should not have been, an evaluation of that should not have been triggered without a planning application. Can you help me understand that a bit better?
I mean, any landowner, any applicant has the opportunity to make an application under Section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act. They don't have to have any, like there's no prerequisite in the legislation for them to have a planning approval in place before we consider an application under Section 28. But I will reiterate that the application for the cut and fill, that was an application to undertake site alteration. There was no equivalent process under the Planning Act that the applicant was required to follow in order for them to do that work. If they had required an approval under the Planning Act, then the city would have required that, but there was no requirement for it.
So at any time, a landowner can file a Section 28 application and have that considered by the RVCA.
That's right. And as much as we certainly encourage, landowners to follow, a planning process first. I mean, we receive many applications for, say, like redevelopment or, development on vacant lots of record that fall within the regulated area. And in those cases, if an application requires a rezoning or some sort of Planning Act approval, we certainly encourage the applicant to do that first, but it's not a prerequisite under the Conservation Authorities Act.
And then my third and last question is around liability. If the cut and fill permit analysis that you did turns out to be wrong, to whom can the landowners turn if there is flooding for restitution and compensation?
It would come back to the developer.
Okay. Your obligation is obviously to do a thorough analysis of that fill and cut and fill.
Yeah, I mean,
and you have engineers who have signed off on that.
That's right. The Conservation Authority, when we're processing an application under Section 28, we exercise our due diligence. There's a very rigorous engineering review is undertaken. Sometimes peer reviews are involved. So yes, absolutely. The authority and the executive committee don't take that job lightly.
Okay. Today's zoning bylaw application proposes, as I understand it, updating the floodplain overlay to reflect the work that has been done through the site alteration. Do I understand that correctly, I think?
Well, there was a previous application, as Melanie described, to modify the floodplain overlay, but this is a further amendment to the floodplain overlay to better match the as-built drawings that we've used to modify our floodplain mapping. So it's simply modifying the floodplain overlay in accordance with the Conservation Authority's updated flood lines for that site.
Okay. And the City Council's role, this planning committee's role, as you understand it, is not to second guess the RVCA's authority in telling us that a floodplain modification is appropriate.
That's correct. We have vetted the as-built drawings and the lines, and it's gone through a rigorous kind of GIS exercise, and we are, as the producers of the floodplain mapping, we have a high degree of confidence that those lines are correct. We pass that information on to the city, and then the city modifies its zoning accordingly.
Okay. This has been a fascinating morning, actually. Glenn, thank you for your help.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Thank you, Mr. McDonald, for your frank answers here. I'm going to put you on a bit of a spot here because I appreciate the answers you've just given to my colleagues here. And I think what's pointing out to me anyway is that a number of Mr. Cooper's assertions may not quite be accurate or not nuanced properly. One of the statements he made was that RVCA is taking no responsibility. And I'm going to tell you, I've worked with South Asian Conservation Authority, the Mississippi Conservation Authority, and to a lesser degree, the Rideau Conservation Authority on different files. And I find you have some of the best staff in the industry. I like the idea that we have the conservation authorities to be specialists in the field that you're responsible for. So I found that a rather shocking comment by Mr. Cooper to suggest that the RVCA was not asking for certain documents, as Councillor Leeper just clarified for us, but other statements in there. So I'd like to give you this opportunity to respond in any way you'd like to the assertions that Mr. Cooper made about your organization.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, I mean, Mr. Cooper is certainly entitled to his opinions, and it's pretty clear from his presentations today, and obviously the correspondence that we've had with him previously, that he disagrees with the decision that was made and the process that was followed to arrive at those decisions. But again, he's certainly entitled to those opinions, and nobody has to like, I guess, the decision that was made, but it doesn't in any way diminish the the amount of effort and technical review that went into the processing of the application. And again, the executive committee, the authority's executive committee, and staff, take this job very, very seriously. And the review was undertaken, and the conclusions and the decisions were made accordingly. So again, you know, there may be disagreement about the decision, but it doesn't take away from the due diligence that went into reviewing it and getting us to this point.
Thank you. Could you also mention, like, there's some concern over downstream flooding later on, and concerns with the I think Cooper's words were uncontrolled runoffs. Could you talk about some of the options that are available to mitigate that, so that councillors can have and the public that are listening can have more confidence in the fact that, you know, for example, there's ICDs, inlet control devices, there's constrictor pipes. There's all kinds of things that we can do in a situation like this that controls that runoff. So I take great objection to the suggestion that's uncontrolled. Could you address that? Because you would have even more examples as to what can be done and reasonably done when we get further down the road, like when we have your watershed report and when we actually have the mitigation plan in place. Can you touch on some of the options that we would have available there?
Yeah, I mean, the current Jock River subwatershed study has a criterion that basically says that there should be no quantity control on the lower reach of the Jock River. And that's been a long-standing recommendation. It goes back to one of the original studies that were done for the, I guess what was referred to at that time as the South Urban communities, both on the Gloucester and Nepean sides. And so that recommendation was brought forward again in the most recent version of the Jock River Reach 1 subwatershed study. And if the update to that study concludes that that assumption is no longer valid and there has to be, or there should be, quantity control, then there will be options to deal with that. I think the concern that has been expressed is that the current plan of subdivision does not contain any blocks of land that have been set aside for kind of our conventional stormwater management facilities. But again, if the study does indeed recommend that quantity control is required, then the onus will be on the developer to demonstrate how that's going to be done. And there are a large range of options available to do that. I'm not a professional engineer myself. I'm a professional planner, but not an engineer, but I'm certainly familiar with a lot of the approaches that can be taken. And certainly, you know, with the focus on low impact development, LID techniques for stormwater management, those are all things that can be explored. So again, I'm not an engineer, but I do understand that there are plenty of options available to deal with it, but that will rest with the developer.
I'll add one and then I'm going to be done, Mr. Co-Chair, but one such option that comes in, it can come in after the fact, and we've done it across the city in a number of locations, is take a soccer pitch, for example, and recess it, like drop it down 12 inches or more, and it becomes basically a storm water pond for 6 to 12 hours after a major storm, and then through almost like a weeping tile network, that water is dispersed under the ground in that time, and you're back playing soccer within hours. So there's lots of things here. I would urge my colleagues to not think that we're going to leave anybody in a big puddle here at the end of this. There's ways that things can be done. I've seen it in my own area. I'm more than happy to take anybody around a tour of Monaghan Drain to see the work that Frank and Ryan Polkinghorn from the city, the work that they put into that area, and it's just an actual gem in my neighborhood. So if you want to see it, I'll take you through it. But I certainly have confidence in this application. So I'm going to thank Mr. McDonald for his frank comments, and I'll be done now, Co-Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Chair Moffat.
Thank you. I just don't really have a question. I just wanted to take a moment to thank Glenn for being here, and Eric as well. It's not common that we get RVCA staff here. Obviously, there's no obligation for RVCA staff to be here at committee because our decisions aren't necessarily directed toward you, and we don't have, the situation that we're talking about today is something that's a few years old, but that you were directly involved in, and has created a lot of conversation at this committee over the past couple of years for different files. But I think having you here, even though not to speak directly to what's in front of us, only helps to sort of bring all the information to light, and your direct responses, I think, are much appreciated. As someone who sat on the RVCA, really the only member of council who's been on the RVCA and regularly attended meetings for the last 10 years, it's nice to have your frank approach here and the work of the RVCA. I have, the reason why the ward that I represent is being renamed the Rideau Jock is because the Jock River runs from Ashton down through Richmond and then eventually ends at the ward boundary at the 416, which then leads directly into the Conservancy lands. So it's a huge part of our ward. The Jock River is, so is the Rideau, and the work of the RVCA to ensure the management of that watershed is done with the utmost respect for the properties and the residents that are in it. I mean, half of the village of Richmond is built in the floodplain because the village of Richmond predates floodplain mapping. So it's a huge concern for anyone downstream as to what happens upstream. And it's because of the RVCA that I have trust in the process to be able to support files like this. And similar to when it was actually Kaivan as part of the Western Development Lands in Richmond that went through a similar process involving a couple of municipal drains in the area and some low-lying undeveloped lands that are now being developed with no impacts upstream or downstream to residents in Richmond because of the work that the applicant did with city staff and our drainage department and the RVCA. So Glenn, Eric, just appreciate your time here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair Moffat. Well said. I'm not seeing any other questions. This has been a good discussion. Thanks to colleagues for the excellent questions. And it's kind of interesting. It's almost like a workshop. We spent the first part of this meeting talking about Bill 109 and approval times. This, I think, has been a good look into why sometimes planning applications do take a while to review and approve. There's some very good reasons for that. So thank you to staff and to RVCA.
Sorry, is there a question? Questions for staff, city staff?
Well, this has all been part of it. So we've had RVCA, but if there's any additional questions for staff, yes, by all means, this is the time.
Thanks. I think the last couple of questions I have are for Mr. Mark.
Sure, go for it.
So, Mr. Mark, it's we've heard from the RVCA that they expect the city to respect their determinations with respect to where the floodplain overlays should be mapped. Is that accurate? Do we have any wriggle room on floodplain overlays?
Mr. Chair, I would hesitate to say the city never has wiggle room, but there is a clear expectation that the city would follow the RVCA with respect to a finding of floodplain. It would be an extraordinary case where we did not.
Okay. If council were to reject this rezoning application modification of the floodplain overlay on the basis that maybe we don't trust the RVCA's determinations and conclusions, what's likely to happen at the OLT?
Mr. Chair, I would seek, if council made that decision, I would seek to find a professional witness that could sustain such a decision. I would not value my chances very highly.
Okay, and then I just wanted to confirm as well, some of this discussion has revolved around when it is appropriate or not to apply for a cut and fill permit under Section 28 of the Act. Is a planning application at the city a requirement to apply for a Section 28 cut and fill?
No, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate your confirmation on all of those. Thank you, Mr. Mark.
Thanks, Councillor Leeper. Any other questions for staff or comments on wrap up? Okay, so on the report recommendations that are in front of us for zoning bylaw amendment for 3285 and 3305 Borrisokane Road, are they carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Okay. Thank you. The next item that was held, the last item that was held, was that motion on changes to the Development Charges Act. That was my motion. So I'll cede the chair to Chair Moffat. There were a couple questions, I believe, from Councillor Leeper and Councillor Menard.
Yeah, it was Councillor Menard that had his hand up first, and then Councillor Leeper. But if Councillor Menard stepped, nope, there he is. Sean, go ahead. You had a question on.
Thank you. I'm sorry to hear the kids in the background there.
It happens. I've got 5 of them, so I know.
Yep. Occasionally I turn my screen off for those types of reasons, but the question I had around development charges, it wasn't so much on the motion as just a general discussion, one that I hope comes back to planning soon. And that's just around how we charge, what we charge for what. And I wanted to raise it with staff because we do have differing charges for different types of properties. So our new official plan is targeting many more multi-units and trying to have less, I guess, development on the periphery of only single family homes, but having more back-to-backs, more semis, more apartment buildings. And I raise it because right now in Ottawa, we have one of the lowest development charges for single family homes of any municipality in Ontario. We are extremely low. And so, and I just wonder about the incentivization of multifamily units versus the incentivization for development charges around single families, for example, single family homes or single unit homes. And so I guess I just put it to staff about when is the appropriate time to start talking about that. I recognize city staff also recently brought forward a report on the tax rates for multi-residential versus a single unit and multi-residential versus residential. And the multi-residential is still higher. It differs for new builds now, but on the old builds, it's still higher. So I wonder about those points and about our incentivization of what we're trying to achieve in the new official plan. And if staff can just comment on that, and I'll turn my sound off now.
Chair, I have Gary Baker. He's on this meeting. Perhaps he can respond to the question about the DCs.
Sure. So I guess your first question, there's a built-in incentive or there's a built-in differentiation when calculating development charges that if you're applying a development charge to a single family or semi-detached in Ottawa, the persons per unit is assumed to be higher, right? So it's assumed to be like 3.5, 3.4. Whereas if you're building a stacked townhome or a back-to-back townhome, it's classified as an apartment. So those apartment units have a persons per unit of say 1.8 or 1.82. So they would pay a lower development charge based on that persons per unit calculation. So more persons per unit in single and semis, fewer in townhomes. And since 2008, we've been applying a apartment persons per unit to all back-to-back and stacked townhomes. So that's kind of the built-in incentive of development charges for those types of units.
I appreciate the partial answer on one piece of that, but the bigger question is around where our standing in Ontario. I understand that we are exceedingly low, if not the second lowest, the lowest for development charges on that type of build, on the single unit build. And I'm trying to get at that fact in terms of what we're trying to build here into the future. I totally take the point around person per unit. but it's not so much, it's our comparison for other cities is what I'm getting at. And the numbers I've seen, we are very, very low. So perhaps you could comment on that and when this might come back to us for consideration of how we set DCs on these types of properties.
Yeah, I've looked at recently, just maybe a month or two ago, I looked at the 2021 BMA study, which kind of what looks at various fees and development charges and tax rates in the province. So if you look at that particular document, it does a survey of development charge rates throughout the province. So for single family dwellings right now, and in part it's because in the 2019 we just did an interim update, but we're ranked 45th in the province. So out of the 200 or so, or how many responded to that survey, we're 45th for single family dwelling rates. And I believe we're around 21st or 22nd when it comes to non-residential development charge rates based on the 2021 BMA study. So relatively speaking, we are
Gary, big cities in there that are like anywhere close to us, because I looked at that too. That's what I'm referring to is that exact study. And so when I look at cities our size, or even just big cities classified in Ontario, well, I think we're last of the big cities.
Yeah, I mean, like, because yeah, if you can differentiate, you can kind of parse. We're kind of more close to the top. We look at single tier, but when you look at as the BMA does, both upper and lower tier jurisdictions, say up in the GTA, like York, Peel, Durham, Halton, they have the lower and upper tier together, and their rates tend to be closer to the 90, 100,000, 110,000 per single family dwelling, where ours is around around the 40, 35, 40, $45,000 range. So, but if you looked at us from
that's very appreciated.
Yeah,
as
single tier might be slightly different. So, sorry.
I lagged there. I did not mean to cut you off at all. If I did, I was just lagging. So I guess this is just a flag for the future that it's something we need to consider. The charges that we put onto, for example, multifamily, whether we can lower some of those in compensation for a higher rate on our single families to I guess, evoke what the official plan says we're trying to do. We need to align some policies, and particularly around land as well. The way we price in land, I've been having lots of conversations with people about affordability, and I'd love to bring that in to this council about, you know, some innovative moves we can make on that end of things. And development charges are certainly one of them. I think we need to review and take a look at. But Gary, thank you so much for that information, and very appreciate it.
If there's one other, I've kind of back a number of years ago, I've asked about kind of sort of what you're asking as well, because I noticed that some municipalities have attempted to do what you're talking about. And the challenge that was identified to me by our consultant at the time is that development charges almost is a very prescriptive type of process, so that persons per unit is kind of the driver. And as he said, and I can send you his response when I asked about that, and it's difficult to apply them on the basis of ability to pay. It's more of a here's the formulaic application, and this is what we've calculated, and versus say trying to differentiate on a basis that would draw in the ability to pay or affordability or whatever, right? So that's kind of that conundrum of development charges that. But I can send you, like, that's something I asked him about maybe 10 years ago. There was a municipality that was kind of contemplating what we're discussing, and I thought it was intriguing at the time. So like I said, it may give you some additional background information.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you, Gary. Councillor Leeper, did you have a question, or did it get asked by?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry. Chair, with no disrespect to Co-Chair Gower, this is a councillor motion. I just would like to hear what Gary has to say. Gary, do you consider that moving down this path is advisable and prudent? You're on mute, Gary.
Sorry, and I guess I was supposed to, it's through the chair. Yeah, I mean, with the motion that's coming forward today, it's in referencing the changes that were introduced by the province back in the fall of 2019 that came into effect as of January 1st, 2020 under Bill 138. So and that interest rate is applicable to deferral of development charges and frozen DC rates. So I think the rate that we're proposing is kind of a compromise between various options that we looked at. So, but I think frankly, it's relatively higher than other municipalities are charging. So we'll see what the reaction will be as of after May 1st. But like I said, it was a compromise between extremes, and so we thought, in consultation with planning, of course, and with finance, thought that was the best option to go with that particular rate right now, and see what happens, type of thing, right? But it is slightly higher than what's being charged. A lot of municipalities used to charge a 5% flat fee, flat interest rate, and but ours is more. It has two different determinants, and one of them would have resulted in an interest rate of 17.7%, which is very, 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 very high. And I don't know if to be frank with you, I don't know if the province would have allowed us to do that because although we had the flexibility to determine a rate, the minister has the powers to step in and say that that's not reasonable. And I have a funny feeling that they would have said that 17.7% would have been deemed to be unreasonable. So we kind of reached a compromise and came up with the rate that's going through with the motion today.
Okay, so the rate is a staff supported rate that's being proposed, and the risk, it sounds like, is that the developers may chafe and view that as too high rather than anyone considering this to be too low.
Yes, and I think the minister, I mean, like I said, they didn't prescribe a rate when they introduced Bill 138. They left it up to municipalities to make the determination. But I like I said, instinctively, I mean, 17.7 seems to be, I don't know if they would, I think someone might complain about that or say that that's way too high. Plus the Bill 138, it's supposed to incentivize the provision of rental housing, affordable housing, institutional. So it does have a benefit that the province wants to promote those particular uses. So charging a rate that would be extremely high would definitely defer that or deter that from happening.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I don't know if there's any other questions. Just to Councillor Menard, when he was there and you know, his kids were there. I just want to let everyone know, for those of you who may not have kids, they're not always like that. In fact, they're quite often only like that when you as a parent are trying to come off as being serious. And usually they lie dormant when you're not needed and when you're not important. They lay dormant somewhere in the house. And then only then, at that moment, when you need to be serious, do they awaken like monsters in the night and they take over and control. And that's what you get, is what happened when Councillor Menard was speaking. I once had one who was super quiet. I think he was faking sleep for half an hour. And then I started a 20-minute meeting with which he screamed the entire 20 minutes only to fall asleep right after the meeting was over. They do it on purpose. They know they have an evil sixth sense among them. Kids, I tell you. The bright side is you only have two. But you know, I used to only have two as well. And then with every election came another kid. It's the secret reason why I'm not running again. But that's okay. Okay, so I'm off topic, which is why I don't regularly chair this meeting. So the motion before us, that the planning committee recommend council approve, one, that the 2022 development charge or deferral rate be an average of 2020 and 2021 inclusive represented rate of 5.83%, plus the standard 0.5% administrative adjustment for a total rate of 6.33%. And two, that this rate be effective beginning on May 1st, 2022 through to March 31st, 2023 inclusive. And three, that these rates be applied for the duration of the deferral installments over 5 to 20 or 20 years, and any locked-in development charge rates over this time frame. On the motion?
Carried.
Carried.
No, pass it back to Glenn to wrap up the meeting.
Okay, thank you. At the start of the meeting, I forgot to ask the committee to confirm the minutes from March 10th, 2022, meeting number 58. Are the minutes confirmed?
Confirmed.
Thank you. Are there any notices of motion? Okay, any inquiries? Any other business? Okay, then we are adjourned. Our next meeting is Thursday, April 28th. And we do have media availability, I believe, 15 minutes from now, if there's any media interested in speaking with Chair Moffat and I. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.